Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. I'm doing another live stream here. We are going to be talking about the rest of my 2023 plein air portfolio, which I didn't get to in the last live stream. Today is Monday, March 25th. It is about 8 p.m. Central Standard Time here in Wisconsin. So this is one of the few times I am live streaming towards the end of the day. So I apologize for some of the low light here. Maybe that's actually kind of nice. Anyway, I don't have too many announcements to share tonight. One thing I do want to talk about before I get into discussing the portfolio is actually, sorry, one second here. I need to. Here we go. I have everything else ready to go. All right, as I was saying, I did want to just briefly talk a little bit about a update to my teaching page over on my website, acunaarts.com, which is spelled out for you right under my video in the live stream. Something that I've been wanting to do for a while is to actually, hang on one moment here. I'm looking at the wrong window. So over on the teaching page of my website, I just recently added in a whole new paragraph, with a bunch of writing on my teaching portfolio / teaching philosophy type of information. So this page is really designed to be a bit of a landing page for anyone who's interested in studying with me during workshops or private mentoring. It's also an opportunity for you to have some free resources that I'm offering through this page. And basically, I spent a lot of time last week and over the weekend sharing my teaching philosophy, where I sort of introduce myself, a little bit of my background as a educator and as a teacher. So if you're interested in learning more about my teaching style and some of the big, underlying philosophies and mindsets that I try to bring to the learning space, whether that's a studio, whether that's outside in plein air, whether that's in my studio, some of the big ideas I really try to push as an instructor. And so basically, if you're someone who's signed up for one of my workshops, or if you're on the fence and you're considering signing up, this is going to be a really great space for you to learn more about what to expect if you take a workshop with me. And basically, if you scroll down on this page, you can also view my full calendar of workshops for the year. I'm really excited to share that I'll be teaching 4 different workshops that are each 4 days. So there's a lot of time to get into a lot of the fundamentals in painting and drawing. We can get into design and composition. We'll get into some color theory and value theory. And it's just going to be basically a pretty intensive and comprehensive workshop offered in 4 different locations. So regardless of where people sign up to take the workshop, it's pretty much the same format and information that you're going to receive. So what's really great about that is that it's offered in like 3 different regions of the US. So I'll be teaching in Dubuque, Iowa, first in June. Then I'll be up in Door County, Wisconsin for 4 days. I'll be going over to Washington State off of the coastline on Whidbey Island. There's a Pacific Northwest Art School that I'm working with there. And then in October, I'll be in Gatlinburg, Tennessee at the Aeromont School of Arts and Crafts. So if you live near any of those locations and you enjoy my work, or you'd like to, practice and learn some different techniques and methods of drawing and painting, particularly from observation, then these are really ideal workshops for you. So go ahead and take a look at my schedule. And the really nice thing about the titles of each workshop is that they are hyperlinked to where you can actually learn all of the details of the workshop. But you can also register there. You can see the price. You can see more information on the organization that it's with. All 4 of the workshops are a collaboration of sorts with different locations and different schools across the US. So you can learn a lot more about each workshop if you click on the title. And then if you go down, you can find my art coaching and mentoring program, which is currently unavailable just because the spring and summer months are really busy for me. It's hard to also take on some private students. So that'll be back up and running probably towards the end of summer, maybe in the fall. It really just depends on the specific needs for the students that sign up or the students who are interested. So go ahead and take a look at that if you would like some more one-on-one kind of feedback. I've only had one student through that program so far, and it's really nice because it's geared towards his practice and his ideas and his work. And we've been working now for over a year, and it's really great for me on my end of that relationship because I get to watch progress happen month after month after month and really curate my feedback and curate my suggestions to his goals and his process. If you're also considering a workshop, it's always kind of nice to hear some feedback from past students and some testimonials. So I have a few here for you to look at. And then just for anyone who might be interested in my supplies and my materials that I use for plein air painting, I've put together a PDF document that you can open and click on through this paperclip icon link. And then below that, I have a free video out from my YouTube channel that talks about making your own viewfinders. Excuse me, I just had finished my dinner a few minutes ago, so I apologize for any interruptions I have during the stream tonight. But anyway, if you take a workshop with me, there's a very good possibility that I will be talking about and demonstrating ways to use viewfinders in your compositional practice, especially if you're working from observation. So it helps to watch this video in advance. That way you can make your own viewfinders to the ratio of your panel that you plan to bring with you or your panels that you plan to bring to the workshop. So if you're signed up for a workshop with me, definitely check out this page, watch this video, and it'll give you the full tutorial on how to make your own very affordable, easy to reproduce viewfinders out of paper or cardstock or mat board, things like that. And then at the very bottom, I have my suggested reading list for anyone who's looking to expand their library. These are some of the most influential and helpful books that I've found so far that have helped my practice, and it spans a variety of different topics. So go ahead and check that out if you're interested. I think that is it for today's announcements. I'm going to switch tabs real quick, and we will jump into the topic of conversation for today, which is going to be the rest of my 2023 plein air portfolio. Let me go ahead and jump over here. I know my screen is partially cut off at the moment. That's because the newer portfolios, excuse me, on my website have all of the label information like title, medium, year, and other relevant information for the paintings. And that text, when I click on the painting to expand the painting, that text will pardon me one second here. That text ends up cutting off part of our view, so I have to actually expand my browser so we can just see the picture and I can just talk about the paintings. That way it's a bigger amount of space on the screen. That way you can see the details of the paintings a little bit better. I'm trying to figure out, I think I stopped the last live stream on this painting. I'm not going to go back and check. So if I talked about this work in the last video, I apologize. But I'm pretty sure I ended the last stream on the Door County paintings from last year. So we'll go ahead and jump right back in. Again, my name is Hector Acuna. Thank you so much for watching this video or for tuning in live if you are here during the live stream. If you are not familiar with my YouTube channel, I highly recommend checking that out. I have a bunch of other videos on there, like the viewfinder video I just talked about. I have other process videos and a bunch more of these live streams where I walk through my my portfolio and different areas of my portfolio. So anyway, let's go ahead and just start chatting about these paintings. So this is the first painting from the Paint the Point Mineral Point event that's typically in August every summer, and in 2023 I was there for my second year. I did the event in 2022 and had a fabulous time. It was a really great place for painting. I think I talked a little bit about that in an earlier live stream. And when I signed up to go back in 2023, I was really excited because it's a very small city relative to places like Milwaukee or Chicago or Madison, and it's really easy to get around. I really enjoyed the architecture and the what we call the what is it called? I'm blanking on the name. The driftless region in the state. So if you've ever been to Wisconsin and you've missed out on the western side of the state, it's a very hilly and bluffy area of the state because that is where glaciers, when they were melting and moving down the northern U.S., they sort of missed that part of the state, and it's a lot more I don't know, I don't want to say interesting, but it's a very visually exciting place for painters because you can get to these really nice vantage points out in the countryside and see rolling hills, especially as you get closer to the Mississippi River. And Mineral Point is pretty close to that part of the state. So a lot of these streets are on interesting angles and slants because of that. There's a lot of character overall to the city. One of the big differences, though, in my experiences between 2022 and 2023 at this event was that I decided not to camp at Governor Dodge State Park, which is a park that's about 30 minutes from like the downtown Mineral Point area. Thank you, Jane, for tuning in again. I'm glad you liked this idea and this composition. This was one, the title is called The Painter of the Point, which was sort of a play off of the name of the event, which is Paint the Point. And when I first started to sketch and work on the design for this painting, I had people walking by on the sidewalk. This is right off of the main street called High Street in Mineral Point. And within a few minutes, a lot of people had said that the car and this gentleman who's very hard to see in the painting, but he's on a ladder in the middle of the painting. His name is Jerry Schmitz, and he's a house painter, building painter in Mineral Point. From what I remember, he seems to be kind of the main guy for that job. He's very well known amongst the community, and that was very reassuring for me when I decided to paint this view, because it felt like I'm not only painting the landscape or the architecture of the city, I'm also painting one of these key members of the community. And I just sort of happened to end up in that sort of situation. And the reason I chose this view is because I had just finished breakfast. I was walking down this part of the street actually by his car. And when I walked past his station wagon, I could see the whole back of the wagon was filled almost to the roof or the ceiling of his car with house painting supplies and brushes and buckets of paint. And as a painter, I was just naturally drawn to that subject and that sort of arrangement of materials, but also the shape and the formal qualities of his car. So what I liked about his station wagon is that it's very long and it's not very tall, so it has a very extreme height to length or width, depending on where you're standing, ratio. And then on top of his car, he had another one of his ladders, like bungee cord or like tied to the top of his roof of his car. So initially I was just drawn to the car, and I saw the whole vehicle, and I was like, that's pretty cool. Maybe I can work that into a painting. And I wanted to see it from other sides of the street. And when I crossed the street and saw it from this perspective, then I noticed that he was painting the building. I don't even think I had seen him because he was so hidden and kind of quiet in this little alleyway here. And when I stood in this position and looked across the street, I was like, this is such a great sort of figurative moment. There's so much narrative inherently present in this view that it was really easy to commit to this painting. And it's not a very big painting. It's 5 inches tall by 7 inches wide. It was made intentionally for the postcard category of the event, which is kind of unique to plein air events. Sometimes there's small work exhibition, days or categories for events. But what I like about the Mineral Point event is that with the postcard category, every artist has to do a 5 inch by 7 inch painting, and they can use any medium that they want. They can work on any surface. It just has to be framed. And so I chose to work with gouache because it's a very fast drying medium. It's very easy to get thin details of line and small marks and small shapes. And when I'm working in a very small amount of space on a panel, I don't want to be worried about crowding things or having to let go of rendering or detail if there's a spot that I really want to push that level of representation. And Jane Shank was also there at the event, and I remember we saw each other on the sidewalk when I was working on this painting, and she was viewing some of the shops. Actually, she just said that she was at one of the candy shops, and this painter apparently was in your way, which is pretty wild, Shane. Jane. I didn't realize that, Jane, that you were trying to get into one of these buildings here. But anyway, it was a really fun painting to make it. I probably spent 2 hours or so working on this painting. What I really enjoyed about it was trying to depict some of these cast shadows on other buildings. I think that was probably my favorite part of this particular painting. Apologize, I'm getting a call. I'm just gonna change my settings real quick to do not disturb. But anyway, Jane was there at the event too, and I remember we saw each other when I was working on this painting, which was pretty cool. All right, let's keep moving. This is actually the last painting that I did at the event. This is the quick paint. So if I remember correctly, the show starts on Saturday, I think, is when the reception happens at Paint the Point, and then on Sunday, we do our quick paint in the morning, and the exhibition continues for the public. The quick paint paintings are exhibited under a tent on the lawn of the Masonic Temple building where the exhibition is held. So the other thing I really like about this event is that everything is very central to the Masonic Temple on High Street in Mineral Point. So it's very easy to find where you have to go. Parking isn't really too difficult to worry about, and the public is very interested in this event. So I've both years I've had a very good experience with meeting new people and feeling like I was welcomed by the community, not just by the organization that puts on the event. And I think I speak for all artists that have done this show that it's well organized. It's easy to follow, the guidelines and the prospectus. And just the entire process of making your work, showing your work, and sort of knowing the order of events is really easy to follow. So I'm sure that Jane would probably say the same thing. And anyway, for the quick paint, the boundary is a little bit smaller for this day because they want artists to sort of be downtown to meet some of the public, to meet collectors. And then it's really easy to go and drop your paintings off at the tent where we set up our easels and the judging happens and the sale happens for the quick paint paintings. And so this is looking at the Masonic Temple kind of doorway entrance here, and the very bottom sliver of the building right off of High Street. What I liked about this view when I was looking at it through my viewfinder is that it forces the viewer to sort of imagine what the subject actually looks like, because I've cut off so much of the building that I would call, this the main subject of my painting. Even though it has a very small footprint in the painting, it's not a very, visually dominating element or proportion to the full painting. And I like the contrast of proportion to the street and the buildings in comparison to this very large expansive foreground here. So the painting was created, I think, next to the post office. I believe this little corner here in the upper right is the post office building, and then there's a big gap between their building and the next one, which was really nice to be able to view the main street. And I was also drawn to the hedges, I remember, and because they had this really satisfying little break. So to me, this moment here became a key area of emphasis and a focal point that I wanted to try to emphasize. And my way of trying to do that was contrasting the amount of space in that little threshold between the bushes with how much open space is seen in the foreground of the painting. And I think Jane, you were at both events in 2022 and 2023, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm just trying to remember, some of the other people that go to this show. It's a really popular event, so it always fills up really quickly. So if you're watching this and you're a painter who's interested in doing any of the plein air events in Wisconsin, this is one that I would highly recommend looking at. But I would also keep an eye on their deadline and when the registration opens, because it tends to fill up pretty quickly from what I remember. This is also a gouache painting on a handmade paper panel that is varnished and waxed. I believe this is like 7.5 inches by 7.5 inches. So it's a square composition. The challenge I remember of making this painting was that as I was working about maybe 35 to 40 minutes into the process, there were 2 or 3 cars that came and parked right on the other side of these bushes on the street, and it blocked off a lot of the details in the building. And I remember having to rely a little bit on my thumbnail drawing that I made to place some of the architectural details of the windows and the door. And then I kind of had to sort of fill in by moving around to see between the cars of some of the color properties and value properties that happened throughout that 2-hour window of the painting. Jane said that she was only there in 2023. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the max cutoff for artists is around 35 people, or maybe 35 exactly, because it's one large room where the exhibition happens. So there's not a ton of... Well, that's not true. There's the main room, and then there's a second room that's a little bit smaller that's just for the nocturne paintings, which that's another reason why I really enjoy this event, is the way that they structure the spaces. You're not looking at everyone's paintings kind of all mixed together, or even just each artist with all of their different category of paintings, or categories of paintings all in one sort of grouping. It keeps all of the themes in their own separate areas, which is really helpful as a viewer of the show, because you can kind of think about the context of the parameters of the themes, and see how each artist sort of takes on those different challenges. Jane said that she really likes the orange barrel in this one. Yeah, I'm really glad that that's a detail that stands out. That was something that I remember actually in a lot of my paintings. I think I hit a point where I'm like, okay, what are the really intense or unique characteristics of this space that maybe I can elevate or emphasize to create moments of specificity or moments of visual interest and contrast. And the barrel was a moment that I remember really stood out to me, because it's surrounded by very cool colors and very cool shapes in terms of temperature. So it was really easy for me to see that moment as an area to really pull out and really emphasize. And by that, what I really mean is to try to study and spend more time observing and representing, I guess, for lack of a better word. So I really was looking and trying to figure out where the moment of the highlight happened on the shape of the cylinder of the barrel, and really try to think about that turning of form on that barrel. Jane is asking, wasn't road construction kind of a joke in 2022 as well? Yeah, actually, I remember they were redoing areas of the main street, I think, in 2022, and there were a lot of street lights that were like under construction as well. It's tricky for me because I tend to kind of blur both years into one. So I'm trying to remember which year had these like not makeshift, but they were sort of temporary street lights that were much shorter than normal street lights. So the light on the sidewalks was very different and kind of surprising. And I don't remember if that was in 2022 or 2023. But anyway, oh, sorry. Oh, Jane is asking in Jefferson. Yes, actually, you're right. I remember in Jefferson in 2022, like the whole Main Street area was being renovated and was under construction. So there were a ton of these orange barrels everywhere. I remember they had a lot of like yellow construction tape on multiple blocks of the Main Street area, which for me, I didn't mind. I like a lot of those colors and shapes and lines that are present in those sort of under construction views. This is one of the 2 main event paintings that I created this past year in Mineral Point. And so in Mineral Point, Paint the Point, the way it's formatted is that you enter 1 painting as your nocturne category. You enter 1 painting as your postcard, 5x7 category. You have 1 painting for your quick paint, and then you have 2 what they call main event paintings. So there's different awards per category. And so this was one of my 2 larger paintings that I, submitted as my main event paintings. And this one was painted off of one of the main streets. It's not High Street that we can see in the painting, but it's a street that I think it's called Commerce Street, actually, that comes to a T, or it sort of is perpendicular to High Street. So High Street is a very hilly street, and then at the bottom of the hill, it runs into Commerce Street, and that is where this car is parked, along the shoulder of that street. So this is a little bit off of that street, kind of on the back corner of one of the buildings that I was walking around on probably the first like full day of the event. I think I had found this spot, and I was really excited about this perspective and this vantage point for the amount of cropping that was just inherent to this location. So basically what we're looking at, if it's a little hard to tell, is the side of a building and part of a kind of like wooden deck walkway area that leads to a series of stairs that take you to the sort of like the ground floor of the building. And then I think even like a parking lot that's down at the bottom of the hill. And when I was walking around this area, originally I thought, oh, maybe I could stand on the walkway and look the opposite direction and do a painting kind of this open space and parking lot area. And when I came over here, I was kind of looking around, and when I turned around, I saw this really interesting, strong sense of 1-point perspective that took you right to this little sliver of the street and the building across the street. So when I saw this, I was like pretty much immediately drawn to the space. I was drawn to the sense of perspective, the cropping, the way that things block out other information. So I don't remember the types of businesses or, if they were like residential buildings on either side here, but they're very tall. And what I liked about that is that they run off of the composition. So I'm standing at the like middle platform of the stairs. So the stairs come down to a small pad, and then there's another set of stairs. So I'm standing on that little pad, that little flat break in the stairs, looking down this walkway. And what I liked about that is that it brought the ground plane of the walkway almost to eye level. And so the perspective is really skewed because the handle of the stairwell handlebar here is a lot higher than we would normally see it. So it just felt very kind of monumental. It felt very dynamic compositionally. And then what I liked about these big shapes is that it allowed me to really push the contrast of representation between my focal area and the surrounding shapes. So I really wanted the viewer's attention to be drawn and sort of pulled down this walkway towards the street and this building, because I really enjoyed the color temperatures and the range in hue that I saw in the windows of this building. And as we can see, it's a pretty chunky, relatively textural painting compared to some of my other plein air paintings. What's interesting is that if you watched the previous live stream where I talked about my Door County paintings from 2023, one of them had almost the same yellowish green hue, and it was an area of a painting that also had these big, thick, gestural brushstrokes that really activate an otherwise sort of static space in the painting. It's just a large area of negative space. So something I've been really pushing in my plein air oil paintings is thinking about ways to create interest and contrast of movement and mark with just the way that the paint is applied to the surface. So it's interesting to see a few examples of that process in this portfolio. And then the other thing I remember really trying to push or focus on in this painting was simplifying information and trying to subtract some of the level of details, trying to push a sense of texture in the, or implied texture, I guess we could say, of what I was looking at. So this sort of handle, fence kind of walkway here was made up of a lot of these really thin planks of wood. And that was the one moment in the view where I was sort of like, oh man, I'm not really thrilled about the level of repetition, the level of, thin vertical lines. I'm never really one to paint a lot of pattern in my paintings, so I tried to figure out a way to simplify that portion of the painting, and this was my solution to doing that. Now, what was interesting about this shape and all of those planks is that there was this really strong reflected light that was bouncing off of the wood planks onto the building, but also onto those railings of the handrail here. And I wanted to still convey that shift in light, that shift in temperature, and that intensity of glowing light. So that's something that probably this is an area where I probably would have liked more time to try out a few other solutions to that problem, but for the amount of time I had and the size of the painting, I'm still really excited and happy with the result of this painting. This is a 16 by 20 inch painting, which is the max size that you can work on. It's an oil painting on a handmade canvas wrapped panel that's oil primed. So just for those of you who are interested in the surface quality of my paintings, that should help you visualize what you're looking at here. And I think the title for this one is Mulberry in the Middle, because the building across the street is I want to say it's like a clay pottery studio, and it's called the Mulberry something studio. So I wanted to play on some alliteration in the title, and it just kind of naturally worked out that way. I don't know how well you can see it in the sort of full view, but when I click into this detail of the handrail, one of my favorite details to put in was this little knot in the pine board of the handrail. And this is a moment I think that's a good example of the constant question of how much information is really necessary in our paintings in terms of detail to convey a feeling or a sensation or a texture or a sense of history. And it's really exciting to try to simplify the details to a point where you might be able to get a feel of the object, of the surface, of the texture, but it's not so realistic that it's like really, really clear and crisp, and it allows more room for interpretation to play as a viewer with the painting. So this was probably one of my favorite moments in this particular painting. And this painting received the first place or best of show award, which was really exciting. And then it was purchased by a couple who I think also volunteer for the event. So it's kind of like when an artist buys your paintings, when a volunteer or committee member or someone with the organization purchases the painting, it feels really special because, as someone who's volunteered for an event before, I see how much time and effort and collaboration goes into hosting a plein air event, and to then have someone who's been so involved in setting it up and someone who plays an important part in bringing everything together for us to go and make these paintings. It feels like it's not just a painting of the space that they like. It feels like it's a chance to preserve that time and that experience, and to have someone who was part of the experience from like such an early moment in their calendar. It's really exciting and really gratifying to know that someone like that is collecting my work. So I don't remember the name of the collectors, unfortunately, but if you are the collector of that painting, thank you so much. And just in general, anyone who's watching my streams and portfolio talks who are collectors of my work, thank you very much for supporting me and supporting my work. All right, this is the other main event painting from Paint the Point in 2023. This painting is called 3 Ways to Buzz, and the title took a while to discover or to find. And this was a painting I remember working on at least 3 different days. So this was probably one of the more intense paintings I made in 2023 for plein air events. And it's also 16 by 20, so technically this is 20 inches tall by 16 wide, which I'm sure you could have gathered. Also an oil painting on the same material, so this is also an oil primed handmade canvas wrapped panel, and so it has a very organic like subtle weave on the surface, which you can see in some areas of the painting where there's not as thick passages of paint. But the reason why this is called 3 Ways to Buzz is partially, one, because it's looking at the side of a barbershop. So this form at the top of the painting is one of those turning, I don't know what they're called, but turning barbershop symbols, I wish I knew if there was an actual name for those objects, because you see them all the time on the side of barbershops. So that was one of the reasons why the word buzz kind of came into mind. The second reason was because across the street, it's not technically visible in the painting, but this tiny little sliver on the right side in the upper right portion of the painting is the very edge of a brewery / I think pub. I think they have a little bit of food there. I think it's called the Commerce Street Brewery. Or at one point in time, that was the name of the establishment, and maybe Barber Pole is the name of the object. Thanks, Jane. But yeah, across the street there's this brewery pub called Commerce Street Brewery, and a brewery, buzz, drinking beer, that made sense. The third reason I thought about the word buzz is because the whole time I was working on this painting, which I don't know if I mentioned, I think I did, but the event happens in early August, so it's still like the heat of the summer. It's a very warm week, historically, at least in the 2 years that I've done the event. And there were a lot of yellow jacket hornets and bees that were buzzing around this area where I was working on my painting. And I think there's something about oil painting, I don't know if it's something with the pigments and the mediums that maybe draws certain insects to us in terms of smell. The other thing I think for sure that draws in wasps and bees is the colors that we use, especially if you're working with really bright saturated colors. There tends to be a correlation there with my experience with wasps and bees. And I forgot to mention actually the quick paint, that square lawn painting I talked about earlier. Like when I was almost done with the painting, probably about an hour and a half into the process, I was almost finished with the painting at that point, which for me is really fast. Usually I paint the full 2 hours, but because they're such a large, simple shape, I think it was pretty easy to get through that painting earlier. But right at about the hour and a half mark, I felt this pinch on the back of my arm, and I like, went like this because, if you grew up dealing with bees and wasps, it's sort of like, one of the first things you sort of inherently just do is try to swat or hit whatever just stung you. And I think I don't remember if I touched the wasp like as it was flying away, but I remember feeling some sort of insect, and my arm started to sort of swell up in that spot for the next couple hours. And again, that was the last painting of the week, so I had already been around wasps and bees throughout the entire week, and I had gone the whole time without any bee stings or wasp stings. And right at the last morning of the event, of course, is when I get stung. But anyway, so that's the sort of story behind the title of this painting, 3 Ways to Buzz. And this, I think, was the first painting I started for the event in 2023. I found this view, and I really liked this pulled back perspective. If you watched the last live stream where I talk about my Door County paintings this summer, one of the first paintings I finished in Door County was this really long horizontal painting, and like 4/5 of that painting is just the side of a kind of like little fishing shanty building. And there was something I really liked about the panels going from taller to much shorter, and the really dramatic sense of perspective. So I think when I got to this spot and I was looking through my viewfinder, I was thinking about paintings like that where you almost end up with this fisheye kind of warped sense of perspective. And once I had committed to this composition and this level of wide perspective, I was really then drawn to trying to convey all of the different characteristics of form and shape and textures and light. And it's a very warm painting in terms of the palette. There's a lot of yellow throughout a lot of my mixtures in this painting. And something that took a while for me to really enjoy in this particular painting's process was getting a good sense of the color relationships. I remember feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of kind of murky middle gray mixtures that I had in the painting. It took me a while to figure out where are the moments of impact visually in this painting. And by the second or third day, I think I had started to carve out and sharpen some of the shapes between shadows and direct light. Really trying to clean up areas around smaller details and smaller elements, and that started to make more sense in the painting. I started to feel like, okay, there's enough of a structural variety here. There's enough of a sort of visual pathway that I thought was interesting. I also started to spend a lot more time in each session trying to convey all of the variety and texture of the telephone pole, which I kind of want to do a whole series of just telephone poles. There's something really beautiful about the wood, contrasts in color, contrasts in grain, all of the different shapes in the grain of the wood. And a lot of telephone poles have this like charred oil or seal at the base to protect the organic, base of these telephone poles. So there's this really dramatic shift between dark to light color typically for telephone poles, and I really like that level of gradient that you see in them. But this was one of the first times I've tried to really study those patterns and that sense of wood grain in plein air, which was a lot of fun. The other thing I kind of liked about the presence of the pole in the painting is that it has this very subtle diagonal kind of effect, or it appears to be a diagonal. What's interesting is if we look at the width of this negative space to the right, on the base and at the top of the painting, it's almost the same. So it's like, it's not really that dramatic of an angle. What's really happening, I think, is that the width of the line is getting narrower at the top. So it has this sense of leaning or that sense of warped perspective. And then it was also a lot of fun to convey all of the reflected shapes and colors that I saw on the windows of the barbershop. This was another location because you're right downtown. There's a lot of sort of energy and foot traffic and movement of people running errands. Obviously at a barbershop, you get people parking and going in for their haircut. And I had probably like 6 or 8 different people stop by and look at the painting and give feedback or show some sort of interest or excitement. And that's probably one of the main reasons I like to paint in public urban spaces, is because you're right in the middle of all of this movement and activity, which has some amount of influence on the painting, in my opinion. I think, there's something about that sense of energy that I feel like it naturally fits a very expressive, sort of almost like fragmented approach in painting, because things don't stay put very long. So you kind of have to commit to this like immediacy of mark and live with a very pared down or economic form of representation, where you're having to put like 1 or 2 shapes together, and that has to convey a car, or it has to convey a tree, or it has to convey a person walking across the street, or signs. And I really like that realm of process and painting. So anyway, this was a really fun painting to make. This one also sold during the show, which was really exciting and kind of surprising, to be honest. And it was one that I remember kind of getting that feeling of like, well, I don't know if this is going to find a collector or what kind of response this is going to get in the show, but if it doesn't sell and I take it home, I'm pretty excited, because I really like the way the painting turned out, and it kind of represented some new ideas that I had been wanting to try, and I was, like I said, pretty happy with the way it turned out. All right, moving right along. This is my Nocturne painting from last year's Paint the Point event, and this is a 12 by 12 inch, again, handmade canvas panel that's oil primed. And I keep saying oil primed because that's a relatively new step in my process of preparing handmade surfaces. For a long time, I just painted on acrylic gesso, and that's a really good, I guess, ground for oil painting, because it really seals with a polymer-based medium. And the challenge that I was noticing when I was painting on acrylic primed surfaces is that the oil in my paint tended to absorb into the ground at different rates. Sometimes it has to do with the pigment in the oil, sometimes it has to do with the type of oil or how much medium you're using versus how much Gamsol. And you end up with paintings that are kind of spotty in terms of their like sheen and reflective quality. And for the most part, that's not too much of a problem, but occasionally that can kind of get in the way of your process, making the work. And for me, I like to go back and work on the same painting over multiple days. So it's nice to have a surface that's very even. And I say that even though this is a painting that was a 1-session painting. But with oil primer or an oil ground, you don't have that sinking in effect with your oil paints as you're working on your painting. So that's why this has become a very important step in my priming process or gessoing process. So anyway, this painting is, like I said, 12 by 12 inches. The title is 5 and Dime. And that's because the name of this particular general store is, it's a Benjamin Franklin, and then it has a 5-10, section to its sign. And apparently these Ben Franklin stores used to be really popular, and you don't see them around as much anymore, but some people would just call them 5 and Dime stores for short. And when somebody had walked by and mentioned that, I was like, that's a really good name for a title. So that's why I titled this painting 5 and Dime. Even though it's really hard to see or make out what the words are on their sign in the painting, because I just wanted to simplify. And again, this is kind of like those beams in the handrail of that walkway painting. I try to really pick and choose where to really render something and when to suggest something. And part of that spectrum of resolution or representation is going to push the viewer's attention around your painting in a much more intentional way. And when you're depicting something, if you make something a little bit more removed in terms of its specificity or description, I think people do one of two things. Either they kind of just move along and they don't get stuck in that space as much, or it becomes really interactive, and they try to put together something based on the pieces that you left in your painting. And I think anytime I have something with text, it's kind of fun to ride that line of like, okay, they'll probably be able to see either a 5 or an S in this shape, and then this is kind of like a 10. And if you look at the title of the painting, you can probably point to this as relating to the title of the painting. So it's fun to think about those zones of description as a way of creating a visual pathway through your painting, or even just thinking about timing, like how much time do you want people to spend trying to make sense of areas of your paintings. Jane is asking me if I ever tint my primer, and not with oil primer, I haven't. What I have done though, there's 2 things I've done so far, which is usually I would just take the primer, the oil ground, out of the can. I order titanium oil ground from Williamsburg, and it's the only oil ground that I've used so far, and I've had very good experiences and no real problems or issues with it. It's pretty thick, and they do say on the can and usually in the listing that if it's too thick, you can always thin it down with a little bit of Gamsol, like or mineral spirits. And they recommend a 1:5 ratio, so 1 part Gamsol to 5 parts oil ground. And part of that is because you don't want to weaken the molecular structure of your oil ground. So because mineral spirits is a medium or a chemical that strips oil out of things. So when you think of it that way, you don't want to overpower the amount of oil, because that can weaken the adhesion of the ground to your surface. And over time, I think it can also kind of weaken the bonds of that ground and destabilize some of the ground. So I think that is sometimes why certain paintings crack over time. Part of it is also the fat over lean principle, but I suspect that some of it could also be from the ratio of mineral spirits or turpentine to your paint while you're working. The second thing I do or have done so far is once the oil ground is dry, which with this stuff that I've been using, it tends to take anywhere from like 5 days to 2 or 3 weeks. And it really just depends on whether or not I used a little bit of Gamsol to thin out the primer so it's a thinner layer, or if it's really warm or really cold where the panels are drying. And if it's warmer, they'll dry a lot faster. So if I'm priming things in the winter, I'm going to have to wait multiple weeks before I can work on those surfaces. And in general, I think it's better to wait longer to paint on an oil ground than to try to do it as soon as it's touch dry. Like, I don't know if that's really the best way to work over an oil ground. But anyway, those have been my 2 approaches with the titanium oil ground so far. Now, the Nocturne painting that we're looking at here is also on the main high street, which is the name of the street. And the problem I have sometimes when I'm participating in a Nocturne paint out is that I like to paint nocturnes when the sky is really like pretty dark and it's like well after dusk. The problem with painting between like 7 p.m. and 8:30 is that a lot of times the sky is changing very rapidly, not only in its color potentially, but also in its value. And I've had issues in the past where I'm almost like chasing the shadow or the passing of light, I guess you could say, as opposed to chasing the light during the day, during natural light hours. As the sun is setting, you're kind of chasing the light as it's leaving. And I prefer to just start the painting when the sky is going to kind of stay where it's currently at. So even though the Nocturne paint out, I think, starts at like 8 o'clock at night, it's typically still pretty bright at that hour. Excuse me. And I end up just sort of walking around for like 30 or 40 minutes before I actually pick my spot and begin painting. And because I get a later start, I'm usually one of the last people still working on my painting. But that being said, that was really what my experience was like in 2022 during the Nocturne paint out. And I had a headlamp that year. I didn't have any like clamp lights on my setup, so it was really hard to gauge my values. It was really hard to gauge my color relationships. I remember I made this 8 by 10 inch painting looking at actually this street between these two buildings, this street that we're seeing a small section of continues down this big hill and then goes up again. So it creates this really beautiful valley right off of their main street. And I painted that view 2 years ago. And it's mostly of the hillside and the houses with a couple of these little floating illuminated windows. Because the houses were so dark that they blended into the hillside, you just had these little like floating rectangle shapes. And that was a lot of fun to paint. But this year, because I had already started my 3 Ways to Buzz painting, I was really thinking about and interested in perspective. So I wanted to think about this expansive, almost again, sort of fisheye perspective where I'm holding my viewfinder up against my cheek and my eye is looking at the perimeter of the viewfinder, trying to study the angles of the architecture and the street and the sidewalk. And that allows me to really start to notice this extreme, angling of perspective. And what I've gotten in the habit of doing is, as I'm looking through the viewfinder, I'll stop and I'll quickly make a few, compositional lines and shapes in my sketchbook that then I can rely on more so when I'm painting than having to hold the viewfinder while I'm painting. At least for these really scaled back perspectives, that's been my plan so far, and it's been working out fairly well. It took me a while to kind of get used to just that level of I don't know how to describe it, that level of observation where you're really looking at the perimeter of the viewfinder. That took a while to kind of get used to. But what if it makes sense, some of this stuff maybe is lost on people that are watching, but because of the way I'm describing it, I think there's better ways to describe this process, but I'm hoping that you can still get this sense of my approach, because I'm sharing this in case people want to make paintings like this and they're not sure where to start or they're looking for tips. I'm hoping that maybe my experiences can answer potential questions that people have. So the last thing I'll talk about with this process is when I'm looking through the viewfinder, really what I'm looking at are distances of different edges and points along the boundary. So for example, if I was holding my viewfinder up to my cheek, I would be studying from the corner of the top left part of my viewfinder. I would follow along this top line, and then I would really try to figure out how far down the line does my building exit the picture plane. And that would be a decision I would then go in my sketchbook and try to make a little notation or a little mark just as a reminder. And that would give me a much smaller amount of space to then figure out the proportions of the building and the windows. I can then draw a vertical line once I have this angle. From that point, I can draw the vertical line down, and things become a lot easier to piece together. For me, that's really helpful when I'm looking through viewfinders, is to just focus on the heights and the widths of distance between things like the corner to this point, or you can flip it. You can look from this corner and then think about, okay, there's building, sky, right? So if you're someone who uses viewfinders, or maybe you want to start using them, that's how I would recommend using them to start, or if you're wanting to try other methods. The last thing I'll say about this painting before I continue is that one of my favorite things about this painting, because it's one of my favorite nocturne paintings that I've ever made, that's studio-wise, that's plein air-wise, is that it had this really beautiful, subtle kind of green hue to the light hitting the sidewalk. And it was a lot of fun to use pigments like cadmium green. I have one really nice sized tube of Gamblin's cadmium green. It was a pretty expensive tube of paint, but it's been a wonderful pigment. I've really loved using it in my paintings, and it's present in a lot of these mixtures in this painting. So it was kind of the pigment that I used to harmonize a lot of the color scheme in this painting. So we can see it in areas of the window. This is like pure cadmium green here. This is pretty much pure cadmium green right out of the tube. And then a lot of the surrounding area has cadmium green, but it also has yellow ochre, a little bit of ultramarine blue. It has some raw umber, I'm sure, a lot of titanium white. So the green kind of starts to morph into these other zones of warmer versions and brighter versions and more chromatic versus achromatic or muted versions. And it's a really great way to build harmony in your painting, is to think about kind of a central color, right, that you want to exist in multiple zones of your painting. And what I tend to do, at least for skies, is use a mixture of ultramarine blue and phthalo blue in my skies. A lot of people talk about phthalo blue like it's this scary color, and in a lot of ways it is kind of a scary color, but if you're mixing it with another blue, it can only push that blue around so much, right? Like it's the amount of impact it has with ultramarine isn't as noticeable as with a yellow or a white or a red. So I like to use it in things like this, where I really want a deeper variety of blues, particularly in my night skies, because what's really fun about painting nocturnes is that from a distance, or maybe in the first couple of minutes in the process, a lot of times the sky can appear to be black and just like absent of any hue, absent of any temperature. But the longer you sit and you really compare that color of the sky to other colors in your view, you start to notice it actually has a lot of those other characteristics and color properties. And for me, it's a lot of fun to think about temperature in the sky as a way to suggest time of day, right? So because the interior lights are still on in the shop, you know, the sky isn't like a super, super dark value. It doesn't feel that late in the evening, even though this was a painting I worked on from like 8:30 to probably about 12:15 or maybe 12:30 at night. By the time I was packing up, I think I only saw one other artist working, maybe two other artists still working, but one of them I remember was Steve Anderson, and he was maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 buildings down on the opposite side of the street. So I remember when I was packing up, the street was totally barren of any cars, and it was just a couple of us that were still kind of chipping away with our little headlamps or our little clamp lights. And honestly, there's something very, I don't know, comfortable and magical when I'm working on nocturnes, when I hit that point of the process where, okay, like I've resolved a lot of the painting, I've figured out, you know, most of what I want the painting to do and to look like, and then I'm just sort of tweaking. And in that stage of just tweaking things, I feel like I'm most connected to the space and that time of night and the quiet of night. And when I look at this painting, I think about that part of the process and how enjoyable that was. The other thing, before I forget, that I really liked about this view that I wanted to include in the composition, because I kind of went back and forth for a while whether or not to include this detail, but if you look closely along the right side, inside of the store, up in a corner, they had this convex mirror, the ones that sort of bowl outward. And excuse me, what I liked about that object is that it created all these really interesting contrasts of light, but also of shape. Excuse me. And actually, that was one of the things that I was looking at when I came to this part of the street. I saw that mirror inside of the shop, and I debated for a while on potentially making that the main subject of a painting. Like if the composition showed like this level of the mirror, like sort of dominating the painting. I was toying with that idea for a while, but then I ended up going with this, obviously with this more expansive view of the street. And I'm much happier that I did that, because there's just a lot more of a interesting sense of space in the painting. And I like the amount of variety and shape. There's some really nice, satisfying relationships of big shapes to small shapes, and just different properties and color and light and that kind of stuff too. All right, let's keep going. Also, just for Jane, there is another little concrete or construction cone barrel, just kind of barely present in this painting too. Just thought you would enjoy that. I apologize for the sound of my voice right now. I have I don't know if it's just because my throat is kind of dry at the moment, but maybe it's because it's later in the day and I've been talking throughout the day. I typically live stream earlier, and I feel like sometimes I don't have as many problems with the sound of my voice. All right, so back to it. Now we are on to the next event. Also, I did forget to mention that the other really cool thing about Paint the Point and that last painting is that the Nocturne painting won first place in the Nocturne category, which was really awesome. And it just sort of reaffirmed how I felt about the painting. I was really excited about it. I felt like I found something I really liked, and I wanted to make a painting that was like the best possible Nocturne painting that I could make. And to have that be the result of showing it was really gratifying and really satisfying. Of the 5 paintings, because I only brought enough panels to make those 5 paintings per of all categories that I talked about earlier. My approach and sort of process at events lately, I've talked about this in other live stream conversations. My approach lately at events is to just focus on the minimum requirement of paintings and don't try to make twice as many paintings or 3 times as many paintings. And instead, for me, it's been fun to focus on finding the right subject and really getting to know that subject and building a much more meaningful connection to that space and that view and the people that I meet at that space. And that's really become a big turning point for a lot of the success my paintings have had, whether it's with awards or with sales. And it's just, I look at these paintings and I'm much happier with them. So that was really cool to have that happen during Paint the Point. Okay, so this is the 3rd plein air show that I was a part of last year in 2023, and I only did 4 events technically as a participant. I was also a judge at Paint Cedarburg, so I was involved in 5 events, but I was a participating artist in 4. So this was the 3rd event. This is at the Bath County Plein Air Festival in Bath County, Virginia, which is a stretch of the mountain range that includes Hot Springs, Warm Springs, and then I can't remember the 3rd small city that's there. I spent most of my time in Hot Springs and Warm Springs during this week in September of last year. And this first painting I'm talking about here is a 9 by 10 inch painting, or a 9 by 8 inch painting. It's somewhere in there. And it's this, it's the top of one of these large hills. It's almost like a mountain, depending on where you're from. But you can see mountain ranges off in the distance here. And the title of this painting is Fallen Apples, because on the right side of the composition we have this broken apple tree that was struck by lightning, or it was either by lightning or by wind that took this tree out. And I think it happened within the past 1 or 2 years of me being there. So it was fairly recent, I think, that this had happened, based on what the owners of this house had shared with me. And I wanted to paint this view primarily because of the shapes and characteristics of this apple tree trunk. I loved the winding branches and the organic nature of a lot of these lines, and the fact that they existed from this vantage point in front of the house. So I liked that they kind of broke up the solid, flat space and shape of the house. If you're a Harry Potter fan, the other reason I liked this tree was because it reminded me of the Whomping Willow trees in Harry Potter. There's so much character and expression in those trees and the lines of the trees. That when I got to this property, because at the event in Bath County, there were, I don't remember the number, but there were multiple places that we were invited to come and potentially paint. So it was sort of this open invitation for the full week that we were there. And I didn't really take up that offer very much in the first half of the week. And then as I was driving around looking for locations, I saw one of these little signs at the end of a driveway, and I drove up the hill and got to the top of this hill and saw their house and saw the trees. And to the left, out of frame, is this old barn that also could have made for great painting subject matter. But for the sake of time, I really wanted to do a painting in one session. So this was like a 3-hour painting in the afternoon. And I really enjoyed landing on this composition, I was sort of walking around this part of their property for maybe 20 minutes, just looking at my viewfinder and making a couple of different thumbnails. And it was really exciting to try out this idea of pushing what would maybe be a focal point for a lot of artists, the house or the tree, and pushing that really close to the boundary of the composition and allowing a lot more space to emphasize the landscape and the rolling hills of this mountain range. And what I liked about painting in Virginia was that, kind of like, it's sort of like the west side of Wisconsin on steroids with these mountain ranges, but when you get these big overlapping shapes of horizons, and the variety in color shifts that happen, it's really satisfying to think of each of those hillsides as a solid shape, and to think of a unifying color that you would put in to fill in that shape. And it feels like a very abstract way of thinking and working, but for me, that was a lot of fun to practice when I was in Virginia. And then, as we can see, I had kind of a field day with the variety in mark and texture and angles of directional line. So when I would fill in a big area, then I would go on top of that with a little bit more of a heavy body paint consistency and create a lot more varying relationships of color and light and some of those categories. Some of my favorite moments from this painting are the edges of the house, especially this top edge and how it just sort of evaporates into the sky. I debated for a while with that detail too, like, do I clean that up? Do I make a nice straight solid line up here in the corner? And I kind of felt like there were enough areas where the boundary between sky and land, or hill to hill, or mountain to mountain, those lines and boundaries were clean enough and organized enough and continuous enough that it would have been kind of nice to have something to balance that cleanliness out with in the painting. So I eventually just was like, I made this mark really quickly, and then I saw it, and I really liked it because it had this very organic, like broken edge, broken line quality about it. And then I saw it, and I was like, I should probably clean it up. And then I was like, well, you know what? Maybe I'll leave it, and I'll if I don't like it in 10 minutes, or if I don't like it in 30 minutes, I'll fix it. And I still like it right now. So I can't fix it right now because it's in a private collection. This was one of the few paintings that I sold during the event. I think I ended up painting maybe 9 different paintings at the Bath County Plein Air Festival. And going into the festival, I didn't bring too many paintings or canvases that were very large, so I felt like I could bring more surfaces. It was a lot of work to build and prepare all of the canvases and all of the custom frames for each canvas. I spent like 2 weeks just doing those 2 tasks. So when I drove into Virginia, I was really excited because I had already spent all this time building and painting and priming and sanding, that it took a little bit of the pressure off of driving around and finding the right view, and really trying to limit myself. And I sometimes look at the portfolio of paintings like this, or paintings from certain events, where if I did only a few paintings versus trying to do a lot of paintings, I try to play back the experience and think about what I would have done differently, or would I do it the same way again, and how can I learn from that experience now that the work is done. And now I attempted a certain approach, and I can learn a lot from that. So again, because I had so many canvases, I was like, well, I don't really have a lot of time to keep coming back to every location that I've been painting at. So some of them have this fresh mark making quality. A lot of them incorporate these big, almost like color fields of paint. I say color field as in color field painters, like who am I thinking of? I can picture his paintings, but now Rothko. These big solid shapes of color, and really thinking about color relationships, thinking about edge quality, thinking about depth. And think about contrast too, so when there's small marks versus really big shapes, there's a really strong sense of variety there just in the proportions of the composition. Or again, going back to these lines and their sort of organic, weaving, curved kind of character that they have, how does that play against the architectural structure of the house and those geometric shapes that are back there? One of my favorite areas of this painting too, besides the upper right corner, is the sky, and these bold colors of clouds that were gently floating across the sky, pretty quickly, but they were very gently floating. And I remember I'd filled in the sky with kind of a muted grayish violet color, and then towards the end of the painting, when I'd described so much of the landscape and the house and the tree, the sky started to feel kind of stale and kind of boring. And this whole afternoon as I was painting, the sky was very overcast, as you can tell, but there were still like distinct cloud formations that you could look at and pick out. And some of them were darker than the back of the sky, or the majority of the sky. Some of them were lighter. So it became a very fun, short, but very fun game of observing the shapes that I could see and the color properties I could see. And again, how can I get away with a sense of complexity or a sense of difference and uniqueness in the clouds with the least amount of marks or the least amount of varying information. So what was so fun about painting the clouds was that they're both little groups are pretty much one solid color. There's a little bit of a shift between more of a greenish blue and more of a bluish blue in this area, but otherwise they're pretty simple color choices in those areas. Hey Jimmy, how's it going? Welcome to my live stream. Thanks for tuning in. It's good to see your name pop up. This is my friend Jimmy Navarro, or James Navarro. He's an artist out of Iowa. Also has Wisconsin ties though, and he and James have also met at events. I think you've both met at events. I'm not positive on that. Probably at Bluffs. Well, no. Now I'm kind of mixing up events, but I don't know. If you haven't met James and Jane, then it's an honor to be part of that introduction. All right. Anyways, back to Bath County. This was another one session painting. This was in the kind of downtown area of Hot Springs, which is, I say downtown, but it's pretty much one street, and it's a very small area. There's not a lot of variety in buildings or architecture, and for someone like me who likes to paint a lot of geometry and architecture, you kind of have to go out and seek that out at some of these places. So this wasn't started or wasn't created until probably like the second to last day of the event. So by this point in the process of that week, I think I was loosened up enough. I was really searching for geometry. I was searching for hard edges on my shapes. I was really looking for interesting angles, and just somewhat kind of dynamic contrasts of architecture. So when I was walking around Hot Springs, I was walking around the backside of a restaurant / brewery called Bakovia Brewing Company in Hot Springs. It's kind of across from the main hotel resort, which I'm blanking on the name of that resort right now. But apparently this area of this town is where a lot of the employees for the resort park their cars and then walk into work. So when I was painting this, I had maybe 4 or 5 different employees sort of walking down this view on the left side, past the cars, and then continuing behind me, there was this sort of alleyway trail that took you to the resort, essentially. And for that reason, it felt like I was kind of painting behind the scenes of this touristy town and getting a kind of a realistic look at the people that live in the area and kind of their day-to-day experiences, which if you're painting in plein air and you're traveling to a new place, for me anyway, it's always really exciting and really fulfilling when I can start to in a very limited way, but kind of get a sense for what it might be like to live there, or how everything runs. It's sort of like seeing the machine. And what I was told by a few of those employees as they were walking, I remember some of them were commenting on the fact that like nobody ever paints this kind of stuff. And I thought that was really interesting, because this is where a lot of the textures were, and a lot of the varieties in shape and color palette. Like I said, this was kind of at the end of my week, and if you're not as interested in painting rolling hills or trees or rivers and streams, then you're kind of limited to subjects of architecture. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Some of my favorite moments in this painting were the window and this awning, this striped awning by the door. And I should note that a lot of the color that we see in this painting is not true to form. It's not, the building wasn't orange, the car wasn't yellow, the side of the building and the parking lot driveway area were not this kind of greenish orange color. They became that color just by way of context of my palette. So I chose to, once I had my composition figured out, I chose to really limit my range in pigments and hues, and I wanted to focus on things like shape and edge quality and abstraction, and I didn't want to have to be thinking about matching the color properties of what was there. So when I'm working that way, really what I'm taking as information from the view at that point then is the value structure and the chromatic range of the space. So what I look for then is what are the hottest temperature zones of the space versus the coolest or coldest zones, and how can I kind of exploit my palette that I've chosen and reserve the warmest pigment and the coolest pigment for those areas of the space. So that's why this wall is this bright orange. That's because that was the hottest, or warmest pigment that I had access to with the palette that I chose, which, if I remember correctly, was cadmium orange. I think I used a little bit of cadmium yellow medium, and then I think ultramarine blue. And I'm trying to remember if there was anything else. That might have kind of been the base of the palette. So I think I was able to achieve some of these like violety grays with the blue and the orange, and then the blue and the yellow became a lot of the green. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of a primary palette. Like the orange is sort of my stand-in for red. But again, what's so exciting about working with color theory and thinking about color theory is that everything is relative, and you're always able to rely on the fact that two colors is going to give you some level of information. One is going to appear to be brighter, one is going to appear to be warmer, one is going to appear to be more saturated or chromatic. And depending on the properties of those two colors that you place side by side, you can create these really subtle contrasts or very dramatic and, I guess, just dramatic contrast. It's probably the best word I can use for that part of the conversation here. But if I look closely at this painting, what I really like about it is the level of abstraction that we can see. There are a lot of these almost like stacking areas of shape and line, and a lot of the paintings I was making last year in 2023 were made with flat brushes. I've been using a lot of flat brushes in my paintings, and what I like about that is that they're perfect and ideal for making paintings that are really geometric in their shapes. It's really easy to get nice straight architectural lines. So a lot of these vertical lines I think were made by almost like stamping my brush, like these very clean fine point flat brushes. So you can get these really satisfying, somewhat level or geometric lines. And then again, the window and the awning, for me, that was sort of the moment that I really wanted to spend a lot of time trying to accurately describe the changing in light to shadow, the proportions of the stripes. I mean, the sense of perspective. I don't think it's like perfect, but for the amount of time I worked on this painting, it's an area that I'm pretty satisfied with. Looking at the painting now, I'm wondering if maybe the angle of the bottom of the window could have been tweaked just a little bit. But anyway, it was a really fun painting to make. It was fun to think about, like Jane is pointing out, this shadow in the foreground, whether it's the shadow that runs along the bottom of the painting or the shadow of the awning. Both of those areas were really fun to paint. It was a lot of fun to think about the shift in value underneath the awning on the doorway, and really trying to observe and study the shift in value or the shift in color temperature or chroma in this area as well. And then because the metal, like aluminum, or it almost felt like aluminum because the awning is made of strips of metal, and they stuck out at different heights all the way down, shifting heights all the way down the bottom of the awning. So the shadow from the awning was really fun to paint because you had these breaks in height as you moved down that angle. Yeah, this was one of the other paintings that sold during the show. And the couple I remember who bought the painting, what they shared with me in terms of what had resonated with them in this painting is, because I got to talk to them for like 30 minutes or so, which was kind of unusual. A lot of times you don't get that much time to talk to the patrons and the collectors at the shows. And with them, what was so nice is that they talked about I'm trying to put this back into words based on what I remember them saying. So I remember they talked about how much they enjoyed the fact that this felt like a depiction of like the everyday life of locals in the area, because it's not a very picturesque view. It feels like this quotidian, everyday, kind of mundane space. And they both had resonated with the fact that this felt like, it really depicted the experience of the locals, and especially the locals who worked at that resort, because, again, I wish I could remember the name of the resort. I feel like it starts with an O. But anyway, that resort, the hotel is massive, and there's a big golf course, and there's a really nice garden area, and their grounds are huge. So it's this huge employer of the community in that area. And this couple who purchased my painting, they talked about how it felt like this was an opportunity to appreciate all of those people who lift up the economy in that area by doing those jobs and keeping that space and that business operating year after year. So because they probably employ a few hundred people between all of the different areas of staff. If you're a groundskeeper, if you're someone who takes care of the rooms, if you're someone who does the sort of checking in process, all of those different areas are pretty expansive because of the scale of that resort. The other thing I wanted to point out that I'll talk about, actually, I'll save it for one of my other paintings that we'll get to. Actually, perfect. This is the painting I was thinking of. So this was the largest painting I made in Bath County. This is a panel that is 22 inches by 22 inches. And with the frame, it probably comes out to like 27 or 28 by 28. So it's a pretty good size painting in the frame. And what was exciting about this one is that it's kind of like that painting of the apple tree that I talked about a few minutes ago, where so much of the foreground is just like a big solid field of color. This is the same kind of concept or compositional device, I guess you could say. And what you're looking at here is a driveway of a like laundry service company that is the office building and the laundry service building for that same resort that I was just talking about. So just for context, the road that we can kind of see that leads down this portion of the painting connects to another road that is parallel to the buildings that are in my painting here. And if you take a left onto that road and you go down maybe a block. To the right is where that location was that I just showed you in that orange and blue painting. So I kind of came to love this section of hot springs, and once I had discovered these sort of like back alley views of a lot of these service buildings for the resort, then I was super inspired, and I was really excited to just drive to these locations and paint. This is a painting that took, I think, 3 different sessions, and by the 3rd session I was just tweaking a couple of small things, but most of the work happened in the 1st session, I remember. And again, it's almost like the painting is really half the size because the bottom is just one solid, loose, brushy, atmospheric space. If I zoom in, you can really see the washy transparency of the paint. A lot of these small white dots are the ground, the oil ground underneath the paint. So that should give you a sense of the level of opacity, or the lack of opacity, in that part of the painting. And then it gradually gets more opaque as you hit the grass boundary here. And it's hard to tell from this angle, but this little bridge, concrete wall goes over a very small creek that runs along this side of hot springs. And a lot of the water that is supplied to the laundry service, I think, comes from this creek, because they had all of these different pipes like tied to like little mini dams and motors, and right off of this creek. So when I was walking around this area, I remember being really excited for the potential of line and shape with all of these pipes and the buildings and the grass. And I originally was following that trail, or I'm sorry, that creek, and I came down from the left side of the painting. So the creek continues obviously for many blocks, but I walked down the creek for 10 minutes or so until I kind of saw this little bridge, and I came up over the bridge and I walked right along the grass, and then I stepped back and I saw the backside of these buildings, and immediately fell in love with the geometry of the view, and all of these different shapes of the building. So what I like about it is that it's very obviously, there's a lot of rectangles in the building, a lot of right angles, but occasionally we get these really satisfying diagonals as well to create different triangles with these different telephone poles that were leaning on the building. And then there's smaller angles from these pipes that I was just talking about. I liked the angle of the building on the right side compared to the flat level line on the building on the left. So there were all of these really interesting shapes and contrasts of line, contrasts of shape, contrasts of texture. And then behind all of that was the side of this ridge line. So then I noticed this really dramatic shift of scale in these tiny, what looked like tiny little houses that are actually very large, relatively large houses that are up on this hill and this ridge line. And I saw that view and I was like, this is a really cool spot. Maybe I can do this for my larger painting. And so I had to go get the car and move and park. I parked right kind of on the right side of what we can see in the painting. So it was actually it worked out perfectly that I could just park right there in this very wide driveway. It's almost like a parking lot, but it's mostly a driveway. And I could just keep everything very close by. Which is handy if you're working on a big painting, because you go through a lot more paint, you need a lot more paper towels and materials, and it's nice just to not have to like pause and go walk a long distance to go replenish some of your supplies. So let me zoom in here so you can see some of the smaller sections and details. So back here on the left side was a bank, and people were driving up and pulling out money or depositing money. And I liked that you would get these cars that were parked and their brake lights would turn on. So there were these really bright red little dots that were really fun to put in, because otherwise there's not a lot of saturation in the painting in terms of high chroma. And those moments of like really, really vibrant color become like, impactful compositional tools that we can use and elements that we can use to sort of say, hey, look over here, like this is different. This is really high contrast in X, whether it's color, whether it's value, whether it's shape, whether it's line. And, that was a moment that I spent a lot of time painting other things before I had started to kind of notice that part of my view and put that detail in. But you can see a little bit of the architectural elements along the creek. Again, these pipes that run into the building. There was this really cool pipe that came out as an exhaust. So the whole time I was painting, there was this cloud of mist and like hot mist coming out of the building from, I'm assuming, all of the laundry that they were doing and drying, linens and just different textiles and things from the hotel. And what was really fun about committing to the shape of the the hot mist here was that the whole time I was painting, that it was pretty breezy, so it didn't have this really consistent sort of vertical exhaust shape. It just kind of would come and go, and sometimes it would get thicker and heavier and had more of a billowing presence. Other times it would sort of totally mist out and you wouldn't be able to see any of the exhaust. And I waited a pretty long time before I had started to get in and sort of shape out what this part of the composition was going to look like. And that became a really fun part of the painting because I haven't painted a lot of hot steam before. And again, like I said, there were moments in the days where it would be really opaque, and which is kind of bizarre because you think of steam being this very light shape made up of small particles of water, and it doesn't seem like something that would be solid and would block out a view. In paint, you're working with a solid material, so that was something that I had to kind of wrap my head around, is like, how do I portray something that's very light in its physical properties, but with this very flat, opaque, solid material. So you might be able to see there's a little bit of a impasto texture at the very base of the exhaust and the steam. And it was a lot of fun I wish I could zoom in farther, but it was a lot of fun to show that little tiny gap in the the area where the steam actually comes out of the pipe, because you could see through it and you would see the color behind it. So it was really fun to try to study that part of the steam. And then we can kind of see the houses off on the ridge line too, and how abstract they are. There's really not a lot of detail in them. There's not a lot of like finish or completeness to them. I mean, a lot of them are just triangles and rectangles, and they're pretty much made of solid shapes of color. There's not even like a lot of variety in color properties in most of those areas either. And part of that was intentional. I really wanted to simplify as much of the detail and the information as possible, so it conveyed that sense of distance in the painting. Like I was really understanding this idea of like the level of depiction and the level of rendering is going to pull something towards the viewer. It's really going to pull forward areas of your painting. And if you want something to feel farther away, one of the best things you can do is really try to simplify and deduce the essential information from what you can see. Because what's such a challenge, and this is something I talk a lot about when I have workshops, is especially obviously like observational drawing or painting workshops, is that our vision and our eyes, this perceptual system that we have is very efficient and proficient at narrowing in our focus and finding the clarity of our vision in small areas. And what tends to happen is if you focus on an object in an interior space or outside, the area around it and behind it is going to soften, and sort of your vision is going to be out of focus because that's not what you're looking at. The challenge when we're painting in plein air is if we're looking at a view like this that has such an expansive amount of space, and logically that something is so much farther away than something else, when you're standing there on location, it's really easy to shift your focus from, let's say, this telephone pole here, which from where I was standing was maybe 40 feet away, to one of these houses that's, thousands of feet away from where I'm standing. When I shift my focus from the pole to the houses, I could still see windows and doors, and I could see the different colors of the houses. I could see the shapes of the roofs. I could see the different shapes of whether or not people had chimneys. I could see cars. I could see smaller telephone poles and trees. And our vision is very effective at, finding and like changing our focus to things at different depths, right? So when you're painting, you kind of have to unwire that part of your visual observational system, and you have to intentionally, simplify things and abstract information. So this was a really good example of that process. And as you can see, even in areas where you would see a lot of variety and smaller shapes and smaller lines, I was still trying to get away with as much simplification as possible in this painting, in like these vines that were growing on the side of the building. This painting, if I remember correctly, is titled Hot Steam, Hot Springs, Hot Pink. So it's sort of this like repetitive title. And the reason it's called Hot Pink is because there were these bubblegum pink flags that were tied to a bunch of these different telephone poles, and even like this little red and white like construction pipe that was placed in the ground. I just thought it was really interesting that a lot of the flags were this bright pink color. So that's where the title comes from. And I believe this painting is still available. I don't have it in my own possession at the moment. It's with the gallery that hosted the plein air event. And that gallery is called Warm Springs Gallery in Warm Springs, Virginia, within the county of Bath County. So if you're interested in acquiring or inquiring about the painting, please reach out to the gallery. I think the last I heard, the gallery is still operating. I think the plein air event might be in a bit of a hiatus at the moment, but I think the gallery is still in operation. So anyway, that painting is with the gallery. This is probably my most extreme painting that I created in terms of composition during the Bath County Plein Air Festival. This is a 2.5 inch by like 25 inch or something, or 20 inch paper panel. This is a gouache painting on a handmade paper panel. So it's a piece of like 1/2 inch birch plywood that I sized with Golden's GAC 100, and then once that was dry, I glued with a bookbinding acid-free like PVA glue a piece of either Reeves BFK or Stonehenge, Legion Stonehenge paper, or River Point paper. I don't remember off the top of my head which paper this was, but yeah, it was a really cool size to bring with me. I've rarely worked with this height of space in terms of composition, especially this height to width ratio. This is, I think, the most extreme of the two that I've done so far. Jane is asking me if I would do it again because it looks complicated. I'm not sure, Jane, are you talking about this mountain range painting or the last painting with the steam? So if you wouldn't mind just making a note of which painting you're talking about, I'd be happy to answer your question. But this was a painting that I made from a point on the like 1 mile long driveway of my hosts at Bath County. The size. Sorry, Jane, I'm still not sure which painting. Are you talking about this one with this ratio? Oh, of this one. Okay, cool. I would definitely do it again. Yeah. This was a painting that was really, really fun to make. Part of the reason I enjoy making these extreme formats is because it creates this kind of new challenge to composing that feels really different, because like I said, this is the first time I've worked with this ratio before. And going into the event, I wasn't sure if I was going to do a vertical or a horizontal painting. And honestly, I was close to making a vertical painting on this panel. And what I like about that idea is that it allows you to read the painting from top to bottom. So naturally, I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll put the sky and like clouds at the top, and then at some point down the vertical, you'll hit the horizon line or the mountains, and then there's more information that I could incorporate down at the foreground. Like maybe I would have my feet at the bottom of the painting. You know, like it could be this really interesting, expansive perspective. And, you know, when I was driving to my host's house each day, coming in and out of their driveway, there were these gorgeous vistas of the mountain ranges and the blue mountain ranges off in the distance that we can see in the painting here. And one of these hills is called Spring Hill, I remember, and I don't know which one it is. I don't know if it's a hill that we see in the painting or if it's from where I'm standing and making the painting, because this is a very thin sliver of the full view that I could see from this perspective. And I remember I had cropped a very small section of the horizon and the foreground. So there's, you know, like this mountain range is probably a few miles away from where I was standing, just to give you a sense of distance and scale and my relationship to the composition and to the space. So a lot of the varieties and shapes that we see in the sky are really, really, really far away. And what was really exciting about that is that it kind of compressed a lot of the contrast. So unlike the hotel hot springs commuting painting that I talked about with the cars, a lot of that information is really close to me, so the contrasts are really extreme, from, you know, highlights to your occlusion shadow points where there's no light present at all. But with a perspective and a view like this, everything is so far away that the contrasts are really compressed, and it created a very atmospheric color palette and value system that was a lot of fun to paint. This is, like I said, a paper panel, so this is a painting with gouache, and I sealed it like I always do with my plein air gouache paintings, so it has a little bit of a waxy surface to it that I really liked, because some of these bright marks in the clouds and like the rim light of the clouds are made with fairly opaque, and not opaque, but fairly impasto viscosities of paint. So there was a little bit of a texture contrast in some of those spots. Typically with gouache, I try to stay away from putting thick globs of paint on the panels because they can really easily dry out and crack and fall off. So I try to just keep things fairly smooth and flat, but occasionally I'll take a little less water in my mixtures and just put a little bit more of a bodied paint down on the panel. So with the wax combination, there's a lot of beautiful varieties in the surface quality of the panel. And I probably spent 3 hours on this painting. It's, like I said, it's only 2.5 inches tall, so the panel is about that tall. You know, so if you hold your hand out and you make that much space, it's hard because I'm, you know, the angle of my camera right now, it feels like it's almost like, well, my head is that size right now. So anyway, it was a very small, narrow panel, and what I liked about that is that it allowed me to not get too distracted by or pulled in by the details in the painting. So because everything was really small in terms of the physical space of the painting, I wasn't able to go in and put every little tree or every little you know, mark in the clouds into the painting, and I had to think really intentionally and work intentionally with simplification and abstraction of the forms. So it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this painting, and this was one that I brought into the gallery the day of the show. So I remember the drop-off was in the morning until maybe about noon, and then at 1 o'clock I remember I had, or maybe it was like 11, and then at noon I had a 2-hour demo that I signed up to do for anyone who wanted to come and watch me paint and talk about painting, which was only a few blocks away from the gallery, which was really convenient. But the problem was that I had to go back to my host's house, which was about 25 minutes from the gallery, to shower and change because I was I was, not very presentable after dropping off my paintings, and I had to do my demo still. So I remember I had brought my paintings in before the demo, and one of the volunteers that was sort of checking my paintings in, like, saw my painting and was like she was very interested in the painting. She was interested in the price, and she decided to buy it right there on the spot, and which was really cool. It's fun to see who buys your paintings, and I think the price I had on this was like between $500 and $600, I think. Again, it wasn't a very tall painting. It was really long, and with the frame, the frame width on both sides totaled to about 5 inches. So really, it was like almost an 8-inch tall painting by 25 inches. So it's a pretty nice size painting, and it's a pretty good price. So it was really cool to see her collect the painting. And the only kind of downside about the way that the painting sold was that she wanted to take it right away and kind of put it in the back room. And this was my first time at the show, and had I known the format of the not the awards, but the format of the reception, the format of the voting for artist choice, I think it would have been kind of fun to share this painting with the other artists in the show, and then hopefully the public too. But I was just so excited that it sold out. I was like, yeah, we can put it wherever you want, and the bummer then is that a lot of people didn't get to see the painting in person, and it would have been kind of fun to get some feedback and just see what the response would have been. And again, a big part of being an artist is sharing your work and seeing what kind of an impact it has, and seeing how people interpret what we make. And learning from an outside perspective is really, really important as an artist. So anytime I feel like I miss out on that opportunity, I'm a little bit bummed about it. But you can't complain. You can't complain if somebody wants to buy your painting. So it's bittersweet. But anyway, this is one of the other kind of bigger paintings that I made during Bath County's event. This is it's a ratio that is inspired by the widescreen film format, 16:9. That was sort of the inspiration for a ratio that I worked with throughout 2023 at a couple different events. And actually, the car painting that I showed you of the commuters is a 16-inch by 9-inch painting, and this one is it's 1.5 times that ratio. So I have the information. I can kind of see a little bit of the size off on the side of my blanking. By this point in the day, my memory is not as effective, but the size of this painting is 13.5 by 24 inches. The browser, I could see the side of the browser here with the title and the size of the painting. So it's 1.5 times that ratio. And what I liked about that is that it felt a little bit more substantial as an image when you're looking at the painting in person. Whereas the car one feels a lot more modest and intimate. I wanted something that felt a little bit closer to like the theatrical experience of watching a movie and watching a film. And what I liked about doing this in these custom panels is that it allowed me to really approach painting like a director or like a cinematographer, and like, how do you want to frame your space? How do you want to frame your main subject or your composition? And again, this idea of visual pathways. Where do you want the eye to move in your composition? So this was a painting also inspired by my host's driveway. Actually, this is a tree in the forest right off of their driveway. Allison and David, my hosts, who are the nicest people, really generous, super welcoming. Allison is also a painter. She doesn't really do as much plein air, but she's a studio painter, so she's really nice. Allison Lemay, Lemay is her name, so if you want to look up her paintings, you can check out her paintings. But anyway, this is a tree that I saw right off of their driveway. When I first got to their house with when I pulled in on like the main first day of the event, I remember driving up that, like, again, 1 mile driveway up in the mountains, and there would be breaks in the trees where I could see those vistas like the last painting was inspired by. And then there was like dense forest again. And what I liked about that was that it felt like if I wanted to, I could just stay and paint in their driveway the entire event, and I would have been perfectly happy. I would have been super inspired and probably would have felt very, very well connected to where they live. And the only reason I decided kind of not to do that was because there's a few reasons. One, I had never done this event before. I've never been to that part of Virginia before. Two, when you're welcomed into someone else's home voluntarily with these hosts, for me anyway, I don't want to be in the way. I don't want to, overstay my welcome. And, I also just wanted to paint some of these other spaces and views. And again, you kind of want to get a feel for what it's like to live in this place and all of the different locations that you would interact with. And it's easier for me to enjoy the process of painting if I feel like I'm getting out and experiencing things like the grocery store and the gas stations and the library and getting to meet people that live there and hear the way they talk, hear their stories, hear the way they interact with their neighbors, and all of that kind of feeds my inspiration when I'm painting there. Not so much that it's like, okay, now I can go and illustrate someone else's life. It's more like now I can really connect and feel like comfortable here in this place. And regardless of what I choose to paint, I feel like, okay, I'm not just coming in and pretending to connect to something. I feel like, oh, this painting I'm looking at or this painting I'm making is going to be a reminder of this person that I met. And I'm glad I'm saying this because I forgot that talking point that I wanted to make on the hot steam, the big painting that I showed you. And the last talking point that I wanted to make on that painting was that I met this gentleman whose name is escaping me right now, which is a little bit of a bummer. I'm sorry I keep zooming in and out. I'm trying to click and leave my my view here for us to just look at the painting. But with that hot steam painting, there was a gentleman who worked for the resort that, along with like 12 other, men and women would pass by where I was painting, and they would stop and look at my painting, and they would share stories and ask questions. And a lot of them were cruising around on these little golf carts, and it was just kind of fun to be in the middle of all of that activity. And, so when I look at that painting, I think of people like this gentleman whose name, again, I feel terrible, I can't remember his name, but, he was someone I remember I have a picture of him standing next to the painting, like the last day that I was there, because, when you're standing in one place for like anywhere from 3 hours to 9 or 12 hours, there's a pretty good chance if you don't move that people are going to come up and talk to you, and people are going to introduce themselves, and they're going to ask questions, and especially if you're someone that isn't always there in that place, right? So plein air painting has this inherent icebreaker, this beautiful icebreaker for social interaction that a lot of times when you're moving through life, you don't get to encounter. Unless you probably go out of your way to create those moments, or if someone else who's just that kind of a personality is doing that for you. So as a painter, it's really fun most of the time to be in these places and have people that you would never otherwise get to meet come up and ask you questions or share stories about what you're painting and what it means to them and how long they've been there, and what other people that they know think of that place and how they feel, and their goals and their ambitions and their future plans. And I feel fortunate and super grateful that painting is the source for those moments to occur. And it's a beautiful supplement to an already fulfilling experience of observation and connection. And, for example, this maple tree that I painted here, the reason I liked this particular maple tree is because the bark was broken, it was peeling off, there were chunks of it that were missing, it had these really interesting tiny little branches that were still growing, and it was a very thin trunk compared to the rest of the forest, so it stood out to me in its relative scale to the surrounding area. And then the just the trunk being kind of naked and bare like this was really unique and different. And there were, as we can see, there were other trees with a similar sense of loss. So when I look at something like this, that it's not figurative, it's not a portrait of a person or a self-portrait, it just feels like it has potential for narrative or commentary or an emotion or sensation to generate organically and in kind of abstract terms. It's really fun to paint that thing because it feels like you're working with this blank, almost like actor, that has characteristics. It's almost, I imagine if I was a casting director for a movie or a show and you have this character in mind and you need to find someone that looks a certain way to fit that character. That process of connecting a personality to a package of a person and the characteristics of their visual self, that's similar, I think, sometimes when we're painting things like trees or houses or inanimate things as well that have kind of a character to them, that lead us to this headspace and this internal dialogue as a maker and as a communicator. And this was one of the first paintings, I think, that kind of hooked me into painting trees, which I've been spending a lot of time doing since this painting, because they almost feel like people. Like every tree is different and they have their own unique characteristics and qualities and colors and shapes and lines, and it's fun to really study those unique qualities. But anyway, hi Mally, how's it going? Mally's mentioning that it looks like a woodpecker has been there before. Totally, yeah. There were a few trees that had these nice kind of cavities and holes, and again, that was another thing I think about the surface of this tree that drew me to it, is that it had these, what some would maybe call, imperfect characteristics. Like it wasn't this polished, beautiful, clean tree. It had all of these worn, textures and battle scars almost on the trunk of the tree, and it was really fun to allow that to inspire some of the marks and some of the colors. And looking at the trunk for, I don't know, maybe 9 hours, there was a point in that process where I started to notice the amount of color shifting and color hue shifting that was happening. There were moments that felt very cool and almost metallic in the color property, and then there were moments that were really warm and pink in other areas, and some of it was light that was reflecting onto the trunk of the tree. Other color patches and zones were just due to the local color of the wood and just the variety in grain of the wood on the trunk of the tree. So anyway, this is the other painting that's still at the gallery. This one also didn't sell during the exhibition, and Barbara, who owns the gallery and runs the event, she every year, this was new because this was my first year that I was at that event, but every year she typically will ask each artist to keep 2 of their paintings at the gallery for at least a year, to potentially sell through the gallery. And so this one and the hot steam paintings were the 2 paintings that I left with her at the gallery. So if you're watching this video and you're interested in either of those paintings, again, reach out to Warm Springs Gallery in Warm Springs, Virginia. Like I said earlier, I think the gallery is still up and running. I know that Barbara, when we were there, she had hit her 30-year anniversary of owning the gallery, which is really amazing. And it's a really cool feat and a really amazing accomplishment to celebrate. So if you do get in contact with Barbara, make sure to congratulate her on such an incredible business and community that she's cultivated through the gallery. But anyway, this is another painting from Bath County. This is that same view from that really long, skinny, horizontal painting that I had created. And this is just a much, more cropped in view. So this top sliver of the painting is, honestly, that's the same corner of my small painting. And It's kind of nice to see both of them because you get to see different areas of the landscape. So in the foreground, there's this really big farm field where they keep, I think it was either sheep or cattle. I can't remember now. I know for sure there were horses there, and now maybe I'm imagining that there were other animals, but maybe it was just horses that they had in this field. And they were like little, piles of hay. So some of these ochre shapes were meant to be piles of hay. When I was painting this view, there were no horses nearby, so I didn't get to incorporate them into the painting at all. But I'm actually kind of happy about that. I think it keeps the focus on the landscape and on the horizon and the blue mountains off in the distance here that we can see. But I'm hoping that you can see from your screen and just with the amount of information I'm cropping into here, the areas where the paint is a lot more textural, there's more of a opacity, there's more of a heavier sense of body of paint. I'm actually going to pause just for one moment. Actually, I have to check on our dog Lenny real quick. I'll be right back. If you don't mind hanging out for a few minutes, I'll be right back. All right, and we're back. So thank you for letting me take a break there for a second. I'm checking the chat, and I just want to say thank you to Jane for tuning in tonight and for again interacting with the chat and asking questions. I really appreciate your input and your presence here. I hope you have a great rest of your evening, and maybe I'll see you later this week in another stream. For anyone who is curious of my live stream schedule this week, I think I'll be doing my next one maybe not until Friday morning. I have a few projects and things I need to work on this week, so I'm going to once I'm done with this portfolio, I'm going to take a little break for a few days, and then I'll probably start looking at my mural portfolio on my website. So that's where we're going to be going next after this one. But thank you, Jane, and I'll see you in another video soon, or live stream soon. All right, so a few other things I just wanted to mention with this painting. This was one that's, it's a fairly simple painting in terms of the composition. Again, I was really thinking about shape proportion. Having one of these really large bottom heavy shapes in the composition gave me an opportunity to think about where I could find compressions of space. So what I really like are moments where the shape of, a solid shape of space and area of the landscape would create these like bottleneck moments. And I like that contrast of wide to very thin or narrow in terms of shape. So for me, that's really, I think, what's holding the composition together still. Otherwise, it's not a very dramatic and diverse composition, I would say. So this is a painting that I do have here in my studio that is available, and if you're interested, let me know. It's one that I think captures that freshness that I was talking about earlier. You can see these pretty opaque, almost impressionistic kind of marks along the horizon in the sky. I was trying to think about the temperature shifts between warm and cool that I was observing along the horizon, and again the really beautiful compressions of value that I observed between the mountains and then the sky. Because they're so far away, the contrasts are all reduced, and the atmosphere and the lighting in this part of the country creates these beautiful blue mountain ridges. I'm sure there's other reasons why they're blue, but for sure that's part of it. So that was really fun to observe and capture in this painting. This painting is titled Spring Hill maybe like Spring Hill Afternoon. I think this one and the other one of the same view have Spring Hill in the name, so it's hard to remember which is which. This is probably the most bizarre painting I made during the Bath County Plein Air Festival, let alone, I mean, maybe even all of last year. It definitely is one to consider for that type of category or label. This is of a boulder that is sitting in, I think in Warm Springs, Virginia, between Hot Springs and Warm Springs. And there's this boulder that was placed on the side of the road in a parking lot, kind of just by itself. And the painting is 9 inches wide by 8 inches tall. And the title of this one, I can see it. It's I Can Smell Tacos Cooking by the Rock. And it's kind of a goofy, narrative title. The reason tacos are even in the name is because at this spot, there's a taco truck that sometimes is operating and open in this same parking lot, which is otherwise just open and just empty most of the time. And when I was painting this painting, I didn't get any tacos because the taco truck was closed down. It was sort of parked off to the side. And when I was driving down this is sort of the main road that connects all of these little towns. A different day when I was driving by, they were open, and I did get to try some tacos, and they were very good. But if you're a fan of or familiar at all with worldwide wrestling or worldwide entertainment wrestling, or I think that's the name of it, the WWE in United States pop culture, which I used to be really into it when I was a kid with my brother. We would watch it, and then we would get in trouble because we would be jumping off of the couches and wrestling. But anyway, The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, famous actor, and just like personality type of person, like his catchphrase was, "Can you smell what The Rock is cooking?" And when I had the tacos and I was thinking about a title for the painting, the thing that made the most sense was I can smell tacos cooking by The Rock. And it's kind of an inside joke for people that watched wrestling or, had kids that would watch it. Because otherwise it's a very kind of mysterious painting. And for that reason, it's one of my absolute favorite paintings that I made last year. This was one that I remember driving past the parking lot and seeing The Rock a few times before I decided to actually park and check it out. And it was something that took a while to feel like it could be incorporated into a painting. And I remember when I parked and I started walking around, I had my sketchbook and a pen and my viewfinder. I literally walked around the entire rock and was looking at it through my viewfinder from different distances, from different perspectives, and just trying to figure out what's the most interesting way I can compose with this object. And that honestly is one of the best ways, I think, to practice composition and design, is to really simplify your subject matter and really hone in on the relationships between your main subject and everything around it, as opposed to looking at a very expansive view with a lot of shifting planes and distances and shapes and lines and colors and all that good stuff, to just focus on this one thing and think about, how do I frame this in a way that is exciting and interesting for me to look at and to paint. And what's really helpful as a reminder of this idea is, realistically, we're the first viewer of the painting as it's being made. And what's nice about that is when you're deciding on your compositions for your paintings, it's sort of like the test, right? Of like, am I going to enjoy looking at this for X number of hours? Because if I'm not going to enjoy it for more than 10 minutes, why should I paint it? Why should I spend 4 hours or maybe 8 hours or 9 hours on this view and on this composition? So I've gotten in the habit of like spending more time circling and walking and going back to a point in space and looking at it again and looking at the thumbnail and making a different version of the thumbnail and really trying my best to ensure that I'm excited about the composition before I even open my paints and my brushes and all that stuff. So I can say settled, but I was excited to do this this view. And what I liked about the composition here is that it really kind of feels like a portrait of the rock. It feels like the painting's really about the rock. It's about its sense of scale, its sense of visual weight, its sense of like monumental space in relationship to that patch of grass behind it, to the road, to the house behind it. I liked that it had this very kind of visually dominating presence in the composition because of how far I had cropped into the view, and the way that the negative space kind of varies around the composition was really satisfying. So I liked that we had, when we look at it now, we have more space here, and then it kind of narrows. We come around the corner, and it kind of continues to narrow, and it gets pretty skinny up in the very center of the composition before it starts to sort of redo what it was just doing, where it's starting to widen again around the corner. But what I liked about both sides of the rock from this vantage point is that it had this slight bend and curve. So on one side, it's wider, in terms of negative space, and then narrower on the other side. So I liked that balance of big to small space in terms of negative space. The other thing I liked about this particular painting was the palette of the rock and the textures and like the planar kind of geometry of its structure, and trying to convey all of the different shifting, volumes of surface, where the rock is sort of like, jutting out in some areas, and then carving it, it's like carved back in other areas, and then there's sort of like these creases or big cracks in the rock. And I liked that for the most part it has a very subdued color palette. Like there's not a lot of high chroma, there's not a lot of saturation, and that allowed me to really focus on the relationships of muted colors and achromatic colors, or chromatic grays, I should say. And then with that, the way that the marks and the shapes sort of came together was really organic. There was a lot of variety. There was a lot of different directional movement in the marks and the lines. And it's a 9-inch by 8-inch painting, and this one sold during the reception, which was really cool. Actually, it sold on the second day of the event, and I remember it was really satisfying, partially because I was so nervous that no one was going to like the painting, that it was a really kind of bizarre painting. It wasn't a very iconic painting to a lot of people, and in fact, I remember there was one of the artists from the show who saw me painting it and had pulled up and parked his car and was just chatting with me through his car, and I remember he had kind of like questioned. He's like, really, you're gonna paint that rock, and it started to put all this like doubt in my head of like, man, maybe I'm doing this wrong. Maybe I should be painting stuff that's more, picturesque and iconic and stuff. So I started to kind of get nervous even while I was still finishing the painting, and then before I put it in the show. So what was really cool was the painting sold on the second day of the show. Like the woman who bought the painting, she saw it on day one and she really liked it, but she wasn't sure if she liked it enough to buy it. And then she told me after she bought it on the second day that she went home that night, and all night she was still thinking about my painting, and she just like, if it's there tomorrow, I'm going to buy that painting. So that's the coolest thing someone can say at a show, is like, I was still like it was still in my mind after I left. So it's cool. It's a really gratifying and satisfying feeling to know that the painting is really appreciated for its quirkiness, for its strangeness, for its universal qualities and personal qualities. And my host David at the event, he mentioned something during a dinner later at the end of the week, like after the painting sold, like the very last night that I was there, they had some friends over and invited me to join them for dinner at their house, which was really generous and really welcoming. And I remember David had pointed out something during the conversation about that last painting, and he said to him it was like it was hitting this other level of art and this other level of meaning, and he kind of related it to the opening scene, or not the opening scene, but the kind of mysterious tower object in the Kubrick 2001 Space Odyssey movie, and just like that mysterious, like, why is this here? What does it mean? Like it sort of pulled that whole idea back out of his memory, and it was really cool to hear him say that. And because that wasn't on my mind when I was making it, but I felt like I was kind of thinking in a similar vein though about, like, why is this here? Why is this rock? Who left this here? Or was it intentional? Or like, what do people think about it? Is it an important or a significant detail of their home and their space? I'm checking the time, and we're over 2 hours, and I still have another plein air event of paintings to get through. So I'm starting to think maybe I'll have to break this up again into another part. And I apologize for anyone who's maybe watching these after they've been streamed, because it is a lot of time to sit and listen to all of these stories. But the good news is that you can always jump around or go back and re-watch things, or jump ahead. But what I think I'll do then is probably wrap up here pretty shortly, and I'll just save the last plein air event body of work for another video, which then hopefully that one is only like an hour and a half or so, and people can watch these in stages. So this is a painting that is not from a plein air event. This is kind of a painting that was made just on my own personal time in May of last year, like April and May of 2023. And this is one of the first paintings that I made that incorporated a handmade prop that I had staged out in the field, or in plein air, and painted from natural light, from observation, like any other plein air painting. And maybe I'll let me just see real quick. So, okay, I have at least one other one that's similar to this. So Mally is going to sign off here as well. So I'm going to say goodbye to Mally. Thank you for tuning in as well, and for engaging with the chat and sharing some feedback. I really appreciate it. It's been fun to see you coming to these streams and becoming familiar with my artwork and my painting practice. So thank you again so much for being part of this community here on YouTube. All right, so let me go ahead and just finish up these last two paintings, or maybe three. We'll see what's after that second one. With these props, part of the reason I came to wanting to try this new addition to my plein air practice was because I wanted to allow some of the ideas and the themes and the kind of emotional qualities of my studio work to find its way, but find a space within the context of plein air painting or observational painting to be present, or to play a role in that context. So one of the solutions I found to that desire was to create my own props. And so this box that we can see in the painting is a real box that's probably, I don't know, maybe 1.5 feet tall by 2 feet wide. And maybe, I don't know, 1.5 feet tall. Did I say that already? 1.5 feet tall, 1.5 feet wide, and then like 2 to 2.5 feet long. I guess that's how I should say it. And then what I've been doing is bringing this out with me to different locations and setting it up. And this hand that's sticking out of the box is a piece of like 1/2-inch MDF that I cut out on my bandsaw and painted, and then set up and staged with the box in plein air. And it's been a lot of fun to think about plein air painting in this new way of creating a moment or creating a scenario, and allowing my practice and process to blend and merge between these different influences of painting, these different influences of thought, and to try to kind of come to some new territory that, it feels like a space where all of my interests can kind of play out. And it's relatively new. I didn't start doing this until the spring, early summer of 2023. And I've only done 4 or 5 paintings in this sort of vein. So there's a lot of territory to uncover and explore still. But this is one of the larger paintings that was made with that process. And I can zoom in here real quick and just show some of the details as it loads. The painting is 22 inches square, so 22 inches tall, 22 inches wide. Its title is Up. I kind of wanted a simple title that left a lot of room for interpretation, for the viewer to associate whatever they wanted to. The symbolism of the hand and the arm and the box. And what I've been enjoying about painting boxes in earlier studio work is this correlation and relationship between exterior space and interior space, and the closure of that boundary, and what happens if you can only see part of an object that is emerging from the box, or what if the box has a hole or a gap, like what's inside of the box. And the box isn't really meant to be an element of construction. It's really meant to just be this metaphoric kind of space, this metaphoric object that I can apply other forms and recognizable familiar objects to it, and all of a sudden an idea starts to unravel or grow. And in plein air, what's really fun is it sort of extends that opportunity for discovering meaning by placing these objects in a real place in the world. And I like that level of realism, I guess we could say, of context, that what does this object mean in the context of Wisconsin and the Midwest, or the US, or industrial spaces, or suburban spaces where we can see houses and buildings and street signs and telephone poles. And how does that create a narrative, or how does that start to create a sensation or a history in the paintings? And sometimes when I'm making plein air paintings, it's like it can be difficult for me to access my relationship to that subject of space, especially if I'm a visitor to the space. And sometimes I want to have more of an active role in telling a story or creating a story, and allowing for some personal significance to enter the work. And that's what this series is kind of starting to get to for me, which is really fulfilling. And when I have more time this year, I'd like to do a few more paintings in this same process, because I have a space reserved for August, like the middle of August. There's an extended weekend of time that I'm going to be doing a pop-up show in Milwaukee at a gallery space called Task Creative. And my plan is to exhibit some of these paintings that are kind of blurring the line between plein air and my ideas in the studio. They kind of feel like their own separate category of my portfolio. So anyway, that's kind of what these paintings are being made for in terms of exhibition and purpose, I guess. But beyond just that one show, I also have been feeling this desire to have more of, like I just said, kind of an active role in directing a story, or creating a story with the spaces of painting from plein air. Because what's been interesting about doing a lot of these plein air events is that it has reminded me how much I enjoy painting from observation, but mostly from natural light in observation, or observation in natural light, and thinking about time. Because when we work in a studio from lamps and lights, you don't really feel that sense of time passing. Even if you're painting a figure, we know that the figure and the model is aging every second that goes by, but it's not this drastic, noticeable passing of time that we get when we paint outside from direct observation on location like this. So there's something about that quality of time that is really, really appealing to my creative voice and brain and conceptual side to my art practice right now, that is very fitting. And this practice of staging objects is starting to allow me to take on these new methods of meaning. I guess I can call it something like that. Like, for example, this is another painting, as I'm saying, as I'm talking about the series, this is also from the same line of work that I've been doing. And this hand that's in the box is more of a three-dimensional, like sculpted hand out of chicken wire and wood and tape and spray paint. And if you see the actual object, it looks very kind of rough and haphazard. And what I like about that, though, is that it's not this perfect model of the human hand. Hey, Gigi, thanks for tuning in. It's good to see you in the chat. I hope you've been well. Thanks for joining me. I'm kind of at the back end of the stream tonight. I'll be wrapping up here, I think, in maybe 5 minutes or so. But thanks for saying hi. And yeah, so I'm just talking about this recent direction that some of my plein air paintings have kind of taken, which incorporates the staging of handmade props and objects that I kind of compose in space, and then I compose on the canvas. And what's been really enjoyable about them, beyond some of the stuff I was just mentioning, is that it also allows me to think about the relationship of the object to the space that it's in. And because it's not this collaged moment, it's a real moment that exists in time and space that I'm just observing and, in a way, kind of documenting. That idea or that level of realism and existence, for me, there's something to that that's very appealing and very exciting in this body of work that I'm working on. And this particular painting is called, let me see, it's called Just Yesterday. It's an oil painting on a 12-inch by 12-inch primed masonite panel, which is something I'm kind of stepping away from as a surface or a substrate. But I do sometimes like painting on smooth panels, and for paintings like this, it's really nice for getting really nice clean marks and details and these like really smooth renderings of form and shape. Gigi's asking if these are in the 30 by 30 by 30 show. Those paintings are going to be listed on my website probably in a few weeks in a portfolio, just to view, not for sale. But those are kind of monochromatic, like 4-inch by 5-inch little egg tempera paintings. So those are a separate body of work. But yeah, I'm really excited for that show, which is coming up soon, which I'm glad you mentioned that, because, anyone who's watching this live stream or watching the recording after the fact, if it's prior to April 19th, please know that you are invited to come to a reception at VAR Gallery. That's VAR. And there's a group show, a juried show of small work paintings and sculptures made by, I want to say, 40 artists. And each artist had to produce 30 paintings. And as I'm saying this, it's much easier to just show you my experience and process. So if you'd like to look at the paintings that I created for that show, head over to my YouTube channel and you'll see a whole playlist of videos dedicated to the 30 by 30 by 30 exhibition that I was a part of in January. The show isn't opening until April 19th, so keep it on your calendar. I'd love to meet anyone who's watching this who I haven't met potentially, or see people I haven't seen for a while at the reception. It's a really cool show. I was there last year just as an attendee, and the place was just packed. It was hard to get around. So it's a very successful reception historically, from what I've heard from other artists and what I've seen firsthand. So I'm really excited to be, one of the artists with work on display this year. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. But before I forget, this painting was painted at my grandmother's house, which is maybe about half a mile from where I grew up. My mom's house, our childhood home, is just down this road, up the hill and over the hill. And I spent a lot of my youth on this property at my grandmother's house. And she still lives in this area. She still lives in this house. And I get to come back and spend time at her property. And this painting was made on location in plein air in 2023 in, I think, June of last year. And the objects were set up on her porch that overlooks her front yard, which is this really long, big hill. And then at the bottom of the hill is this pond with these really big, I don't know if they're oak trees or what kind of trees she has here. But as a kid, from the age of 4 or 5 years old, I used to spend a lot of my time in the summers fishing and like on a little paddle boat that she has on the pond. And this is always going to be a specific place in the world that has this really personal connection for me because of the hours and just the the formative moments through my upbringing that I just spent down in this place. And it felt very fitting to try this idea of this process of plein air painting and staging an object with this as kind of like the backdrop or the context of space. And what was really fun about this painting is because I had an object in the foreground that was so close to me, the contrasts and of value and of chroma were so vivid compared to the landscape and her yard, that there was this really beautiful kind of subtle compression of values and contrasts in the background that were a lot of fun to paint and study from observation. And this was painted during like some of those peak weeks of the summer when the forest fires had created this really hazy sky, these hazy skies for us in Wisconsin. And because of that, it has this glowing, sort of quality about it that I think is really kind of beautiful and perfect for this painting as well. I'm seeing a little thumbs down on the video. I think that's probably for the forest fires and not for the painting, but I kind of agree. It's definitely, forest fires are not really a good thing. And for some things, they can be okay. Not a forest fire, but controlled fires. My wife, who's a science teacher, will remind me of that. Like sometimes, for small, really dense areas, especially in deserts, it's good to do controlled burning because it lowers the likelihood of forest fires happening because there's not as much brush to take over. But we're getting off subject here a little bit, so I'm gonna just kind of go back into the paintings here. But anyway, obviously the forest fires that I'm talking about with the haze, those are not good. So this personal painting for me is one that really stands out, and I think will continue to be kind of an anchor for my plein air practice as I look back over time. And this volleyball, as you may have already kind of guessed, is an object that also lives at my grandmother's house in the garage. And I think this was my volleyball that I was gifted as a kid, and somehow it got left at her house. I'm sorry, I keep zooming in and out. I'm trying to move my cursor around, but it's sort of not letting me hold this zoomed in image. And what was really fun about painting it is that it has all of these worn edges and little tears and rips in the fabric of the volleyball. And there's something I think symbolic about that, and it's funny because I had a friend of mine see this painting, and he had commented something like, "Wilson," and I think that's really funny too. And it's something I'm actually kind of open to, that interpretation of referencing the ball to Castaway and that story with Tom Hanks. And honestly, that was a movie I really liked as a kid too. And Wilson is this kind of this surrogate for love and friendship for the character that's in Castaway. And it's kind of interesting to think about our relationship to objects and the meaning and the feelings that we embed into these inanimate objects and the characteristics and history and memories and conversations and all that stuff. And so for me, it is kind of perfect of an example for a reference in terms of pop culture. And I like that the volleyball, to me, it has this really immediate sense of history and time, and it's not what it once was. And as I move into these not later but as I get older in life, I earlier I had mentioned that where I grew up, my childhood home, isn't in the family anymore. Like my mom moved, and I don't get to go back to that property anymore. And having my grandmother's space still, it's a place that I can access and spend time still. It's really incredible, and I'm very fortunate that I get to come here and then to see the volleyball and see the hand and the box. this painting to me is a really powerful painting, and it's one I think that really represents some of my feelings about getting older and changes and being able to control something and not control something, and how time influences how we feel and how we make sense of our lives and the world and our relationships and all of these different dynamics. And it's something that I'm really happy I found my way to making this particular painting for those reasons. And just as a point on process, so when I made the painting, I remember I was able to paint the entire background, the way that it looks right now. Like, all of that was done on location. The box was pretty much painted on location. The hand was pretty much painted on location. The volleyball was something that I really wasn't able to render on location, from observation at her house. So what I ended up doing was bringing the volleyball to our house where my wife and I live and painting it, setting it up in our backyard and trying to position it where the lighting was really similar. And then I painted it kind of like a still life. So I didn't have the background when I finished the volleyball, but I kind of like the way it turned out. So that's something that I'm also kind of becoming interested in, like this idea of starting a painting in a particular place and trying to bring the object there, but then being open to either finishing the painting like in a more controlled environment or just a different environment, and or maybe introducing new objects into the painting that were never in those other locations. So as I'm talking about this, I'm starting to, the wheels are turning and some new ideas are starting to form. So that's kind of interesting. And when I say that out loud as I'm thinking about that idea, for me, it's the conceptual potential of that idea. Like, what does it mean to have a painting that has 3 or 4 objects in it, and one of the objects was painted in the space that the painting presents, versus the other ones? Like, how does that inform the way we understand, space and time and history and relationships and the relativity of these different forms? So I don't know. It's kind of cool to be able to talk about that and start to be inspired by some new ideas. So let's see what the next one is. If it's not a box painting, then I'm probably going to go ahead and end the stream here. Oops, looks like it is a box painting. So this is going to be the last painting of today's stream, and I'll try to keep it under 3 hours. We're getting kind of close, so we'll see how this goes. This was, again, that same sculptural hand and the box, again, brought down to the 3rd Ward District in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This was painted, I want to say, in June of last year. My brother, who lives really close to Megan and I, and actually for a little while he was living with us here at the house, and he has been working for a company that's based out of Milwaukee now for probably getting, I don't want to overestimate, but I would say maybe more than half a year, maybe closer to a full year now. Well, yeah, pretty much a year at this point, because in June of last year, he had to go down, and it's kind of a hybrid position where he works from home, but then he also has to go into the office a couple days a week. So during the summer of last year, when he was talking about having to go down and work at the office, in Milwaukee, I was immediately like, that'd be kind of cool to ride down with him in one day and just walk around the city and make some paintings from observation. I've been wanting to do that since we moved back to Wisconsin. And one of the kind of inhibitors of doing it just on my own is, I don't want to have to really deal with parking and having to repark. Sometimes it's nice just to like be on foot the whole time and not have to worry about moving your car. And a lot of the parking spots only give you like 2 hours of time, so it's hard to like park, find something to paint, pack up, get back to your car within 2 hours. So him offering to let me ride down with him was like the perfect solution to that part of the problem. And so that's what I did one day. I started a second painting that is in progress, and I had planned to go back to Milwaukee and finish it, but my summer just picked up and I lost track of time. So this is the only finished one from that day that I currently have. And this is about 12 inches by 12 inches. The title is called 3rd Ward Gardener. And if we look closely, we can see there's a little flower, in the hand of the this object that I staged. And I actually like went and found a flower in a little garden bed that was on the sidewalk and plucked it and put it in the hand, which hopefully didn't bother anybody, but that was kind of a fun step to try out in this process of staging objects, and almost blurring the line of found material versus staged or handmade materials. And I wanted to have more of an interaction between those two categories. So this was my first attempt at doing something like that. And in terms of color, it also really fit the palette of the rest of the painting, which when I kind of committed to the composition, this is part of Buffalo Street and I want to say Water Street in Milwaukee. I don't know exactly which street this one is that we can see, but this intersection to the right here for sure is Buffalo Street. And so I set my box on top of a garbage can, actually, so it was high enough to be in the frame of my composition. And I liked that it was only at the very lower kind of sliver of space, and it left a lot of room for the actual architecture of the city view that I had to be kind of dominating the subject matter in the painting. But when I decided to go with this composition after I had made a little thumbnail drawing, there was so much variety in color and hue shifting and value shifting that I was like, maybe I'll try to simplify this a little bit by working with a limited palette. And I picked cadmium green, some maybe like a cadmium orange, I think, and I want to say like maybe like a muted achromatic gray. I don't know which gray I used, or if it was one that was just sort of organically made on my palette. But that was my starting place for the range and hues of this painting. So that helped me to really simplify a lot of the varieties in architecture, because a lot of these buildings have a lot of windows. There was a bunch of construction happening over here. And I really wanted to keep a lot of the focus here in the foreground. So for me, it was a lot of fun to simplify and reduce information off in the distance, and kind of also lean into the atmosphere of the space and the atmospheric perspective of contrast sort of compressing, and values getting a little bit brighter, and just overall contrasts in general just becoming weaker. And then things gradually becoming more and more intense in their relationships as we move towards the foreground, or vice versa. One of my favorite areas of this painting was painting the counter sidewalk sign here in the intersection, the hand with the number of the countdown number. That was a lot of fun to put in, because that orange is so saturated and so unique within the context of the palette of the painting. And we can see other areas where that bright color is appearing in other stoplights or in tail lights of cars. A little bit more towards the orange hue in this area with construction, not cones, but barrels in these different areas. And it was a painting that was a lot of fun. It came together really well. There are some areas where I'm like, I wish, maybe I should fix this or that. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with all of the different relationships and sections of this painting. And this is probably one that I'll reserve for that show that I just mentioned down at Task Creative, which I just reserved my dates, so I know I'm on the calendar. I'm committing to this pop-up solo show of paintings. As of right now, I would like these box hand paintings to kind of be the main theme of the show, so I have a lot more work to do from now until August. But if you're around the Milwaukee area that time of year, keep an eye on my calendar over at my website, and I'll be putting the dates up here probably this week for that show. So I need to start building some momentum and getting the word out, because everything is going to be independent and DIY. I'm basically like renting out her gallery space for a few days, and I'll schedule some sort of a reception where people can come and meet people and be part of more of an opening show. Just looking at the chat, Gigi is asking what medium this is. This is an oil painting, also on a primed masonite panel. So it's the same size as the one with the volleyball here, just to give you a sense of scale. What I like about these two side by side is the compositions are so different between them. You know, just the way that the shapes are sort of broken down and the proportions of the shapes. This one obviously has a lot bigger, there's a lot more large shapes. There's less breaks into smaller shapes, especially in the bottom half of the painting. Whereas here we have just a lot more, you know, varying angles and orientations of line and shape. But they're the same size, same materials, same panels. And yeah, so I think that's going to be it. That's going to be the end of the stream. I have 10 minutes before it's officially 11 o'clock. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you're watching this still live, thank you for being here. Thanks for spending part of your evening with me. And thank you to everyone who tuned in during the 3 hours that I was talking about this portfolio. If you're watching this after the recording has been published on my YouTube channel, thank you so much for taking some time to learn more about my paintings, to learn more about my approach, my process, the ideas, the inspiration. So many of these paintings, especially from plein air events and traveling trips, have stories tied to them that are really fun to be able to share. And one of the ways that I do that outside of these streams is also through these publications. This is a little plug for my online independent shop where I sell paintings, but I also sell some reproductions like these little zine books. These are all self-designed, self-published portfolios of my plein air work from different years. So I have so far published 2 volumes. This is volume 1. It's available for $20. Volume 2 is like 3 or 4 times as long as volume 1, and it's only $10 more. So for $30 you can get the second volume, which is full of a ton of information and images of my paintings, images from my trips, people I met, stories. So if you're looking for another way to support my work and my business as an artist, feel free to take a look at my shop over at acunaarts.com, which again is written out right here for you to type into your browser. Also, my website, you can sign up for my newsletter if you're not already subscribed. I try to do these different newsletter announcements like once a month, maybe once every 2 months. Sometimes there's coupons to my shop. Sometimes there's giveaways. It's been a while since I've done a giveaway, but maybe this year I'll try to do at least one. So if you want to, you know, be in the mix for that, make sure you sign up and subscribe. Speaking of subscribing, I'm getting better at this whole wrap-up plugging portion of my live streams. Speaking of subscribing, if you're not subscribed to my channel on YouTube, please consider subscribing. It helps me grow and reach more people and get my artwork out into the world in these different ways and these different mediums. So make sure that you are subscribed if you want to, you know, see future videos or be alerted by future streams as well. Okay, I think that's the end of this stream. Again, thank you so much to everybody who's been following along with these portfolio presentations. And you know, huge thank you to everyone who's encouraging and supporting my work, and especially at this very moment, shout out to Gigi for being here with me, and thanks for the congratulations on the solo show. So yeah, if you're around in August, I'd love to see you at the exhibition and at the reception. Okay, everyone, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. To those of you here live with me, enjoy the rest of your night. And I will see you in a future video. So keep an eye out for a post on my channel announcing the next live stream, which earlier I said it would be on Friday. It's a good chance I'll probably finish this portfolio then on Friday. Okay, I'm Hector Acuna. I'm an artist out of the eastern, southeast side of Wisconsin. Thank you again for watching, and take care. Goodbye, everyone.